it look as cool as possible. If you want to view what
Okay.
I've done to the stream, just go to twitch.com/Kurik. This is the second time I've
Get
been.
really confused by delays.
Oh yeah, it's gonna do that. You might want to just mute. I've just got starting soon there as well.
It still says you're offline.
Does it? I've literally just done it now. It does say I'm streaming.
Simon's setup puts everyone else's to shame by like a long way.
Does it? This is just Discord.
Oh, so good.
I haven't done much. Oh, thanks. Cool. Well, I do try to some degree. It's going to be quite a relaxed and slow learning process for myself. So yeah, let's get this going. So yeah, we're just talking about each other's each other's background, as well as which way we lean. Obviously, I'm sure no one would rather define each other specifically to one thing. So I think if we just start with a topic, if we could have a little section or piece on that, take it in turns enough that we can just have a discussion, just have some fun, have a few drinks, and enjoy the Friday political debate, mate, from 8 till 8.
We're so cool.
Cheers for that.
Cheers, yeah. Cheers, guys. Wee. I've got the Hulk glass, which makes me slightly cooler or less cooler, depending on if you're a Marvel fan. Okay, so is there, to begin with, anything that you want me to put down on a list to add to talk about? Sorry, specifically.
I'm happy with whatever.
Or just just go with the flow.
Talk about whatever you've got coming up.
Cool. Okay. I might start with current affairs to begin with. So in the news recently, I showed Joe about this. I don't know if Dave or Bunton know about the FinCEN files.
The what? Sorry.
The FinCEN financial. What was it stand for? Criminal Enforcement
the leak.
Network.
The
leaked documents.
I vaguely saw it. I haven't read into it much yet.
I might send you the link now so you can just read it as we're discussing it, I guess.
Cool.
I mean, this kind of hinges on the whole corruption with a lot of banks and transactions. I'll just get that sent to you. I'll send it on Discord so that everyone can have a look.
I guess it's kind of like 2020's Panama Papers, or like kind of a continuation of that, except it's considerably more damning, considerably more evidence, and I guess it sort of implicates like major banks far more directly. It's like the stuff that we all know is going on all the time, and yet we all kind of pretend it's not, and then every few years there'll be something new like this.
Yeah.
And then we all pretend to be shocked, but we also kind of know that it's going on all the time. It's kind of like global warming. For like a couple of years, we pretend it's not happening, and then there'll be a big thing. It's just, it feels very cyclical, and it feels like something that is never actually tackled by anyone.
Yeah, agreed. Especially with links to the Russian lobbying and stuff like that.
Surprised absolutely nobody.
Yeah, obviously from the Russian interference document that wasn't really looked into properly at all, or even tried to. What your thoughts on if there's going to be any sort of rift that would change from this, or I don't know. Do you have anything that you'd say, Dave? Are you able to see the link? I'll put it in Discord.
Hang on a sec. How do I get back to the chat?
I can send it on Facebook if that's easier for you. If you want to check it on your phone on a different device or something.
Yeah, do you want to ping it over to my messenger and I'll put there? Then I can.
I need to
multitasking.
Drag this out. Keep that there, and then cool. Okay, Bunton, do you know anything about this?
I don't. But I mean, this is the kind of thing that the scandals like this break fairly often, and personally, I'm not terribly like the scandal is that banks, banks or any other major financial institution is complicit in some sort of crime. But I tend to come at it from the perspective that, I mean, there's plenty of unethical behavior that banks do that is perfectly illegal. And I always tend to see organized crime as just capitalism, but without the veneer of law. So what seems to be going on
dark
here
money, isn't it? It's behind the curtains.
Banks have been complicit in money laundering, which of course they are, because they exist to make money, and they have no real reason to concern themselves with legality when it gets in the way of profit. That is the nature of what these institutions are.
Do you think these institutions should adhere to ethics and moral decisions? Or do you think that there's a large majority that don't really care that they're doing this, and if not, back them?
I think ethics is just a PR word for banks. Like, I used to work in a fraud department for a major bank, and they sort of love to brand themselves about how ethical they are. But the reality is that a bank is only concerned with that insofar as it affects its bottom line.
Do you think that's all banks? Do you think do you think that applies to essentially all financial institutions? Is that just something that, for you, is inherently bad about businesses that deal particularly with money, and they're not salvageable? That's just how they'll always operate, and thus need to be changed completely?
I mean, banks are the most egregious, because what a bank is it's a incredibly large, unimaginably vast business that is designed to turn money into more money. So a bank is absolutely the most egregious example of this. But every major business does this, because the larger a business gets, the less the personal views of, and I'm not defending small businesses either. Small businesses are the same but on a smaller scale. But on a vast scale, there's this depersonalization that happens, where it becomes about shareholder interests and executives acting to carry that out, and no one really, morality sort of ceases to be relevant. The only thing that matters is the maximization of profit. So that the scandal here is that people found out about this, but as you said, this kind of thing happens all the time, and we all sort of acknowledge it and just pretend it doesn't.
In regards to what Joe said a second ago, do you think that it's all banks type scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are cooperative, banking cooperatives and building societies which are based on the principle of mutual aid rather than just the maximization of shareholder profit.
Because I guess the cooperative bank would be an example of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, you would have thought so.
I guess a fairly big player in the UK,
but
I imagine.
But that's I don't know that the thing. Well, the thing is, the cooperative bank is not cooperative anymore. It's now privately traded. It was cooperative, but that's just the reality that when you have a for-profit business, it has no reason. The state has a reason to care about legality in order to sort of maintain the veneer of legitimacy, but I tend to take the view that the state and the sort of legal apparatus of the state is more about defending capitalism from itself, so that there's this sense that, justice will be done when something like this breaks.
That's happened in Northern Rock, though, isn't it? When they didn't let it go back.
Exactly what happened. Sorry, Simon.
Oh yeah, I was probably going to say the same thing as you. You go.
Saying this is exactly what happened with the banks in the crash in 2008.
Yeah.
Where they were just so completely deregulated that they literally just started gambling with other people's money because they could, and because the returns on it were so great when they won. But then when they didn't win, there was no safety net. There was nothing to stop them, no regulation in place to stop them from doing this. Mm-hmm. So when it all kind of went Pete Tong in 2008, they, there was no comeback on any of them. So because they were so interested, so obsessed with generating profit by any means necessary, that they would do these increasingly risky and nefarious practices to just ramp up their profit margins.
Yeah.
If I can share a story, and this is anecdotal, so take it as well. It's mostly illustrative. But when I worked in fraud for RBS, they did this training day that was all about, the focus of it was all the things we've done to sort of rebrand since the financial crisis and sort of sell ourselves as ethical, because that's a thing people care about now. And I distinctly remember the trainer, who was this upper management type, was talking about, we're taking on more sort of corporate responsibility. The problem in 2008 was that we were giving out loans to anyone. So now we're using things like this, which is a tool we've created in order to deny mortgages to people in areas at risk of flooding for global warming. And that sort of hammered home that, like, they didn't see anything wrong. The person didn't see anything wrong with that. The person didn't see how that was
On
at
the
all
agenda.
possibly like a horrible thing to say. They just saw it as like fiscally responsible. And that sort of hammered home like how much people sort of even down to the individuals working in a bank, not even executives, but just upper management, the way they're able to sort of compartmentalize any action that they take.
Kind of detached from any empathy of impact on society or anything like that. It's profit first, everyone else out the window.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one to start on, because you're a conservative, but conservatives aren't necessarily a fan of big banks either.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me, because I think, like, to some extent, to probably quite a great extent, I probably believe in deregulation of the markets. I do understand,
To what
especially
degree?
with huge multinational banks, that there are problems there with complete deregulation of those markets, because they affect so many people, and some of these banks have like their turnover is bigger than the size of some countries' economies. Like, it's massive, and it impacts so many people. So I get that. For me, what I struggled with the 2008 financial crash was I certainly didn't think any of those banks should have been bailed out. Like, I do not believe in bailouts. I think if you failed as a business, you've taken that risk.
That's capitalism, isn't it? It should be.
I don't think that should be bailed out.
Here's the thing. I would agree to that with that to an extent, because you've got them. We've got two leftists and a libertarian conservative here, and you've got sort of the thing where the center left generally, it talks a lot about like nationalization, but the further left you go, the more that's seen as a stopgap measure. In 2008, what ended up happening is the UK government had to buy up the shares belonging to a lot of major banks. RBS was an example. I think the government still owns like 78% of RBS. Mm-hmm. And what I would have liked to have seen happen there, and I wish we had a government that would have been willing to do it, is just the nationalization of those banks, or for the government to nationalize those banks as a temporary measure, and then eventually, this is my ideal, eventually to shift them towards because that would have been the perfect opportunity to take them out of the hands of like wealthy shareholders and instead put them in the hands of the actual people. Like, because what a cooperative bank is it's owned by the people who put money into the bank, rather than by people who own part of the business.
Well, they own the shares, don't they?
Do you not think that some level of competition actually gives us as consumers a better deal in the end? Like, I think. So I would completely agree with you that a lot of banks, a lot of huge businesses, they do some pretty terrible things, and things that I guess government should try and hold to account. And this is partly what I get annoyed about, that governments either can't or won't hold these kind of businesses to account when they do something bad. But this is what I struggle with, is what then is the role of government here, and what do you think government should do when something like this is leaked? And you kind of see all the shady stuff, that basically all the crime money, the criminal money that is being funneled through kind of the banking systems. do you think then it is the role of government to do that? And I guess, like, why then hasn't government been able to do something about this? For, let's face it, since the dawn of capitalism, this has been happening. Why have we not been able? Why has government not been able to hold these guys to account?
Because it's a neoliberal government. Because the government probably agrees with you more than it agrees with me. Like, the government does not, broadly speaking, support regulation. The role of the government in capitalist society is, as I say, it's to act as a sort of organizing area for capitalists, because the alternative is complete deregulation. You get things like scandals like this breaking all the time, and you get this sort of instability. And it breaks away the sort of veneer of legitimacy, this idea that, there's as long as they're doing business ethically and all according to the law, then everything's fine. And that's the role of government, is it's to regulate capitalism, not to protect consumers, but to protect businesses from an angry populace by granting them this sort of saying, just get on board with us, a little bit, do things by the book a little bit, and then, we can say that you're doing everything legitimately and people will be fine with it. And they are. People accept that. Like, people have already forgotten about the Panama Papers.
But shouldn't the government represent us?
I strongly suspect in this case that the government is less angry that the banks have been engaging in money laundering and just more angry that they've been caught. If you just look at the people that we have in this government at the moment, they have so many, personally, so many vested interests in all of these companies. The moment they stop being MPs, they all get a six-figure consultancy job.
Yeah.
With,
it's happened recently, hasn't it?
Many.
To answer your question from just now about competition and nationalisation and privatisation, it's often something that gets brought up when people talk about being in favour of privatisation. Is, well, surely if there's competition, that leads to better service. Well, with some things, yes. With other things, no. Because if we're talking about things like banks and railways, the health service, power generation, for instance, they exist as natural monopolies.
Yeah, I actually completely.
There is only one railway system, for instance.
Yeah,
there is only one power distribution system. So it's impossible to get any kind of real competition going there. So what you end up with is just basically a cartel of all these companies that are kind of nominally competing with each other, but not really. The water network is possibly the worst example of this, because it doesn't matter where you live, there will only ever be one water supplier there.
I actually completely agree with you on that. Yeah, there's Sorry, I'll let you finish.
Sorry, I was in that circumstances. There's no impetus on the companies to improve services, because with competition they think, we make our service better, we get more customers, we make more money. Well, if there's no need for competition, they just say, we can do what we want, charge what we want, and still make loads of money.
Which often leads to making cuts and stuff like that, which won't improve the service.
They cut corners on quality, on safety, on coverage, on all sorts,
just to get bigger profit.
At the end of and most of these companies are then if they were owned cooperatively, at least by the people that actually work within them, that wouldn't be as bad, I don't think. But the fact that a lot of these shareholders do nothing, literally nothing, they add nothing to the business, they do no work within the business, they produce no product, provide no service, and just cream off the money. And if you're talking about that, for instance, the private contracts that are being awarded within the NHS, for instance, any money there that goes into a private shareholder's pocket, where's that money come from? It's all public taxpayer money, and there's no value coming from that. It's just wasted money that is just lining a shareholder's pocket.
Do you think that's true though? So, like, just to go back to your original point, like, I think a lot of people who probably hold my political positions, my kind of political position, probably wouldn't agree with me. But I very much agree with you on natural monopolies. Like, I am a big fan of free enterprise and commercialism. But yeah, you're right. Like, I think things like trains, like a lot of utilities, are natural monopolies. I actually don't think that for me would apply to banking. I think especially like for me, it's particularly interesting to see over the last couple of years the kind of challenger banks like Starling, like Monzo pop up. I think that kind of proves that you can go ahead and do that. You can go ahead and start a bank. Like if you're a startup, like a financial start, like tech startup, you can go ahead and actually become a challenger in the market. And I think you'll only see guys like Monzo, like Starling, who are doing things a very different way, and they're very consumer focused in the way that they do things. Like HSBC, Nationwide, these guys are not consumer focused. They are investor and shareholder first. And I think I think eventually the consumer will start to see through that. And they'll think I'm going to, like as 16, 17, 18-year-olds, they're very ethical, and they think with their ethics and they buy with their ethics.
Okay.
I don't think one of them will be. Yeah, sorry.
Within the confines of capitalism, then yes, there is room for competition in the banking sector. But the problem comes is, I suppose going off on a tangent is, personally, I view the banking sector really as just an enormous pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
It's just
we invest our money, doesn't it?
As was said earlier, it's just taking money and making it into more money. And what has been done to that money to make it worth more?
Do you not think that like banking, I guess going back to a point earlier and combining it with this one, I still feel like generally a lot of these huge organizations, like let's just include Microsoft in this, for example, I still think a lot of them, although they've done some pretty bad things, I still think a lot of them have provided an overall net benefit.
Well,
I think for me personally, I've used HSBC all my life. I found them to be a great bank to use. Like Microsoft are not a bank, obviously, but like a huge organization, obviously one of the biggest in the world. And again, it provided a net benefit to me in my life. And I don't know, you think about schools, you think about hospitals, all the places that kind of rely on banking sectors and technology sectors and these huge multinational organizations that do some pretty bad things. But also, I think probably because of competition, have done some really great things for humanity as well. I don't feel like the overall, for me, and this applies to the way I think about a lot of things, I don't think just overhauling the system completely is the right way forward. I still think you can reform, but just actually do it and do it properly and do it in a way that benefits the consumer.
Sorry, 1 second.
Do you think
conflating... Sorry, 2 seconds. Do you think that they could do those, they have those benefits, as well as not, do those bad things, basically, things that will ultimately cost jobs and livelihoods, like the crashes which happen, seems to be every 10 years or so.
If I actually, on the subject of that question, actually, it's weird because you're describing yourself as a libertarian, but I'm now the person that's arguing against the government. And I think it's a very important point that, like, I don't know about Dave, but like I'm an anarchist. I don't support the government. I think the government is for private interest, and I think it's a fair point to say that, like, take any right libertarian who's maybe like one who's like socially progressive, who doesn't like blame everything on the Jews, but like take a right libertarian, and if you can convince them to sort of not view private property as a natural law, to not like believe in the sort of sacredness of being able to own things by right of having bought them, then you can they will turn into a market socialist, verging to anything from a market socialist to like a fanatical anarchist, like left anarchist. I don't believe that you can regulate major banks, but I also I'm not arguing against competition, because I don't support nationalization except for like a few for things that I think should be free at point of use, like healthcare. But with banks, I'm fine with competition. I just want it to be competition between things like cooperative banks or building societies. I would argue, I would agree with the arguments for competition between companies or between entities. I just don't. What I'm opposed to is private ownership and like private monopoly.
Yeah, I mean, you're never gonna. I don't think you'll ever persuade me that, you know, like, I fundamentally subscribe to like the ideas of life, liberty, and property. The things that you make, the things that you earn, are yours, and, you know, fundamentally, I don't think should be taken from you. And
It's
like,
fun.
there's kind of two sides to like how I see myself, like how I see my politics and the way that I think these should be done, and they're probably quite similar to yours. Is that like I've got my utopian ideals for like what my completely perfect society would be like, and then I've got like short-term wins, like things I think that we could do now that could improve it, that might, like, they might not necessarily subscribe to like how I think my perfect society should be. And I guess you're probably the same, right? So I guess like your step towards socialism would be like my step towards like a more conservative, like less regulated, lower tax society. And then you'd move to your like utopian kind of like anarchic left society, I guess. Like, would that be fair? I don't know.
I mean, for me, like any win for employee ownership is a step in the right direction. But if I can make a point, what you just defined private property there as is not what private property is. You just said you have the right to own something if you made it, which is not private ownership. Because, like, let's say you're a builder, or you're a group of builders that work for a privately owned company. You build a house, and then the owner turns around to you and says, right, this doesn't belong to any of you. You get wages, fuck off. It belongs to me and it's mine to sell.
But that's a social contract. That's like, I get what you're saying. Like, it's not so much exactly what you've created you take. But whatever contract you're working under, or if you go and build something for yourself, or if you go and create something, I don't feel like people should necessarily have the right to go, you've got, now you've got more than this guy, so you have to give 20% of your stuff that you've created to this guy. I feel like that's like...
Well, to what degree as well, because, you know, people like Jeff Bezos and stuff have a massive workforce who are underpaid. You know, they need to be... I don't know, like at least a part of the whole construction of it. You know, the profits and stuff like that. That, you know, could you honestly say that Jeff Bezos is, or anyone else that has a massive company? You know, is it him that's worked that hard to create that, or is it to a point where it's just, you know, other people doing the work for him? And he's getting the benefit.
Like, you quite often see this like argument around that, like, you know, Jeff Bezos didn't actually create Amazon. He had like a loan, but it's actually not true. It's a bit of a myth. Like, Jeff Bezos did start Amazon, and he started it very successfully. Got it to a point where it was, I believe, like making millions of pounds of revenue, and then got an investment, I think, from like friends or family or something like that. Like, yeah, I'm not saying that Jeff Bezos has earned every single dollar that guy's ever made. Like, he definitely hasn't. But you also can't ignore that it's his stewardship that has managed to make Amazon so incredibly successful. Now, like, I don't think I'm going to sit here and argue whether I think billionaires like should or shouldn't exist, because I can see both sides to it, right? Like, I think there are strong arguments either way. Like, that dude does not need however many billions of dollars like he's got.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't necessarily think just because he's got it, he should have to give it away. But I still think, like, for me, capitalism tends to be overall like a net good thing, because again, I think Amazon has basically improved a hell of a lot of people's lives, and because of the competition that it creates, I still think you get fundamentally better companies out there. It like destroys as well. That for me is like one of the beautiful things about capitalism. Like, it creates and it destroys, and Amazon will at some point stop being successful, and something better will, I think, take its place. Like, these things never last like 1,000 years.
I'm sorry, by the way, Kirk. I'm really sorry because we've veered so far off the original topic.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, that's going to happen.
But I guess like my argument is, any company is the product of this is one of the things of like the ideology that the capitalist ideology that our society is based on relies on this sort of individualization where it's like, oh, this guy is like the CEO or the main owner of this company, so everything is an extension of what he's done. Whereas it's like Amazon has so many people involved in it. It has so many people. It has employees. It has like all the way up to like management and executives who are like, I doubt Jeff Bezos individually does that much anymore. I suspect.
I bet he does fuck all.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, ultimately, the kind of society I want is rather than having, for some reason, having one person or a small group of people who own all the things and take all the money and then pay wages. I want a society where everyone who contributes takes an equal cut of the earnings, rather than, because I mean, to go back to the subject of banks,
in proportion to the contribution, I'm guessing.
But how do you get enough money to invest in something? And the answer is generally like you can very rarely earn enough money to like start a company or to even like invest just by working like through wage labor. Generally, the way you generate that money is through already having a lot of money.
I guess it depends on the amount you want to invest, right? Because like I imagine my pension is probably invested somewhere in HSBC or some of these like financial giants. I get what you mean, and that like to be able to invest the amount of money that will actually make significant difference to the actual balance of your bank account, you're going to need like a hell of a lot of money. And I guess your point is, how do you do that already without basically having that money? Which is a fair point.
The example in there's a book by one of the founders of modern anarchism, which is Peter Kropotkin, called The Conquest of Bread, and he talks about this. Like, say that you're a silversmith, right? And this was in the days of artisans. This was in the days of what would be considered the self-employed. Is you're a silversmith. You take raw silver and you make it into a product and you sell it. You're never going to make enough money to like to be rich. So how do you, if you want to get to become vastly wealthy, how do you do it? You take on apprentices and you pay them. You get them to also like take raw silver and work it into a product. And you take the profits of what they sell and you pay them wages. And that is fundamentally our society is based on the way to become wealthy is to what you described as a social contract, which is an interesting term because the thing about like the idea of the social contract is the social contract could be anything. At one point, the social contract was, I'm the king, I own everything. Or I'm like the feudal lord. Like you can replace the social contract and say, we're all workers, we all split the cost of the thing. It's just an arbitrary construct. I don't believe that because the current ideology is built around justifying capitalism. We could replace that. We could have people believe in a different thing.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, for me, there's, the risk of sounding a bit soundbitey, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism because the workers don't own the means of production under capitalism. And by what I mean by that is they do not receive the full fruits of their labours when they, because there is always someone above them creaming some of the profit off. And I don't mean, say you've got 10 people making something and one person managing, overseeing, making sure they work. That person managing, overseeing is part of the workforce because they are streamlining and making sure they actually do it. What I'm talking about is it's the shareholders essentially. It is your Jeff Bezoses who are now so far removed from the actual task of making the thing, whatever the thing is, that they have no input into it. They don't put any work in. None of the work that they do themselves goes into it. And it's interesting. You said before about the right to keep what you earn. Well, what about the workers' rights to keep what they earn? And
Yeah, I get that argument, but also we're talking about one aspect of capitalism right now. Like we're talking about what I guess you guys would consider the most kind of egregious form of capitalism, where you've got aggressive multinational organizations who do some dodgy things. But actually, there are a lot of small, medium-sized enterprises that do some really good socially and like social ethical work, do some really good things, like treat their employees really well. You've got a lot of freelancers who again completely earn kind of like get to keep most of what they do. I think there's like, you're just talking, I think, about what could be considered the worst forms of capitalism, when actually like there's still a lot of things that I guess small, medium-sized social enterprises do on a day-to-day basis that never really get covered in the pros and cons of capitalism.
Well, on the subject of sorry, I just wanted like Sorry to I just want to tell like a story here, because that made me think of something. On the subject of small businesses being ethical, I'd like to tell you a story about an interview I had recently for a guttering company. And this is a company, it's about like 20 employees, right? It's one office, there's a bunch of like call center people and about like 10 or 15 people who do guttering. And so I went to this interview. I met the guy who owns it. He's this Hungarian immigrant who like started this company up like 20 years ago. And I looked around the office and I was like, there's a lot of books by L. Ron Hubbard in this office. And I went through the interview and it was essentially a front for recruiting for Scientology. I think it was a real company, but they made me do the like personality test thing.
Oh yeah,
that was one of the weirdest interviews I've ever been in.
At the end, they had me like the guy tried to get me to read Dianetics. But the point is, like a small business is not necessarily more ethical than like a big business, right? It just has less power to exploit people.
Yeah. I definitely wasn't saying that was the case. Like, I don't think that necessarily small business owners are any better or worse human beings than Jeff Bezos. Like, I don't think that's true. Their potential for doing either a lot of good or a lot of bad is lower because they don't have essentially the same financial power that those guys have. Like I agree. I also think, like, and again, this forms part of my political philosophy about, like, I guess, small government and institutional power, is that as soon as there is a lot of very, very concentrated power for me within governments, and actually, to be fair, within like huge businesses as well, that tends to corrupt people, and that tends to mean that people make those decisions for either power reasons or financial reasons. But for me, that applies as much to government as it does, like major religious organizations or major businesses, whatever it is. And I guess, like, if you have smaller companies, I think especially like new generations of businesses, I think they are tending to be more ethically responsible and socially responsible. I think, and that's partly, for me, I think that's market demand. I think, like, people, especially young people, I think they're getting so much more aware of like, I guess, like, what a company really believes and what they do. Look at, like, Oatly, for example. Like, Oatly recently, I think they got bought by some, like, bad dudes. I can't remember what they do, but, like, they
I don't know about this.
Sold some major shares in their business to some dodgy business. And, like, as soon as they did that, pretty much every, like, 16 to 13-year-old millennial was like, well, I'm not going to fucking buy Oatly anymore. And I imagine that probably will take a hit. Like, I think young people tend to buy a bit more ethically, and again, that's for me, that's a market-led thing. That's like a good thing to see from the market, from the consumer side of demand, actually changing the market.
Point of order here, sorry, but millennials are not 16 years old.
Yeah.
Millennials are in our 30s now.
I'm going to make a point about that, and I'm going to pass it over to Dave. I think there is a disagreement in worldview here, is that you tend to, I think you put more emphasis on individual agency than it's a very, I guess it's a sort of leftist thing to look at things in terms of systemic issues. You seem to be like, I don't think that no matter what individuals do, the problem with capitalism is not down to individuals. It's not down to businesses being ethical. It's not down to consumers being ethical. It's about systems. Like, right now, I'm drinking Tennent's. I don't know who fucking owns tenants. I don't know, like, I'm a socialist. I should be, like, buying ethically. I don't know anything about this fucking company. I don't know anything about any beer company. It's just the beer that I bought. And it's the same with every product that I've bought.
It's about information, I guess.
Like, even, like, here's the thing. We use the example of, like, Jeff Bezos, which is not a good example. It's more to do with, like, it's better to talk about, like, shareholders, like the people who've actually, like, bought shares in the company rather than, like, the idea of the entrepreneur. But, like, I don't know that Jeff Bezos is a particularly evil dude. I don't know that any shareholder is a particularly evil dude. I just, like, the problem is not whether they're individually a good or bad person. It's that they are systemically, they hold this position. You know, like the idea of, like, on the example of, like, monarchy. You know, in the 1600s, you had, like, feudal lords. The feudal lord could be, like, a good person. It doesn't matter. The problem is that they are a feudal lord. And it's the same with the problem of, like, owning capitalism. Or owning capitalism. Of owning shares in a company. Or owning, like, a business. But I'm going to pass that over to Dave, because you've not had enough of a chance to speak, I feel.
Just interesting to what you're saying about how too much power in the hands of government is a bad thing, potentially, and yet in its absence, in the absence of that government, what we see is this deregulated market where we end up with lots and lots of power concentrated in the hands of an increasingly small group of people. The financial power of, again, to bring up Jeff Bezos, but Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, all of them, that own, I can't remember the exact figure, but it's something like 100 people, the richest 100 people own something like the same amount as the poorest half of the population of the entire world. Mm-hmm. And it's all, it's fair enough to talk about them, doing good in the world. I don't doubt that Bill Gates is a prime example. Has done some great stuff with his money and his philanthropic work. But the problem with it is, and this may sound a little counterintuitive, but philanthropy and charitable giving is anti-democratic.
Yeah. I can see that.
It doesn't. People might think, oh well, what can be more democratic than someone deciding what they do with their own money? But in a democracy, everyone's vote is equal. My vote is worth the same as any of yours, and it's worth the same as Jeff Bezos's. It's worth the same as Richard Branson's. It's one man, one vote. One person, one vote, rather. And in this situation, financially, this is not a democracy. Because charity, if we're talking about charitable giving, I can maybe afford to, I might stick a few quid in a charity pot. I might have a £10, £20 direct debit set up to someone. It's nothing. It's peanuts. It's a drop in the ocean. And these incredibly rich, powerful individuals are able to completely monopolize the agenda by picking a pet project and saying, I like this. I'm gonna throw £1 billion at this. And that's it. That then. But why is that one cause any more worthy than 100 others?
So I guess why I get the argument and it makes sense, but to kind of put it back to you, how is that any different than the government deciding we would like to invest 10 million quid in this project or 100 million in this? I don't get particularly how that's different, because the government is still picking and choosing what it decides to be worthy causes. And
because
actually, we talk about accountability, but actually, let's face it, we vote in a government, they don't fulfill any of their election promises, and they just do whatever the fuck they want. And actually, a lot of the time as well, a lot of the people that work within government aren't even elected. So, I guess why is that?
I'm not going to argue with that. I'm not. You're quite. The entire system of government that we have at the moment is fundamentally flawed and completely broken. But again, we're going back to what you were saying before about my the little wins and the utopian principles. Is that ideally a government would be democratic and fully accountable and fully transparent. And I think that's what needs to be working to do, rather than reducing the size of the government, because that does nothing to increase accountability or increase transparency, and all it ends up doing really is putting the government, this small government that doesn't really do very much, just puts it more and more in the pockets of very, very rich, powerful individuals who, can.
Oh, I think he's cut off. I was going to ask him a question there as well.
Is he back?
I see it just a big grey square.
Yeah, same. Too. I think his internet's just cut off. It's so difficult for me, like when people are saying things, not to interrupt.
No, that's cool.
I'm very impressed with myself that I haven't cussed anyone out yet.
I accidentally have like twice, and I feel really bad for it. I need to, like, when you're on like Teams meetings and you like have like a hand raise thing. I feel like I should be doing that.
No, I think it's going okay. Obviously, everyone's kind of had quite a bit of say at the moment. Oh, have I just messed it up?
He'll reconnect. It is interesting because, like I've said this before, is like I've talked to anarcho-capitalists who live in trailer parks, and it's really interesting talking to people on the socially progressive libertarian right, where they support capitalism and they support private interest, but without any of the like mad alt-right shit.
Yeah. And I never feel like alt-right is libertarian. Like I think there's like alt-right is so.
No, they're fascists.
It's so much.
They're literal fascists.
Pretty much, yeah.
Whereas, where like alt-right guys would love to see a huge national right-wing government, whereas libertarian guys, or like most of them, I know there are some absolute crazy libertarians who live in like the mountains stockpiling machine guns. But I think most libertarians would just like to see a reduced size of government, lower taxes, and like less state interference in their lives. But sorry,
but I mean, for me, what's always frustrating about talking to the libertarian right is like it's almost always it's people who I feel should be socialists. It's people on sort of the fringes of society who are like, things are fucked, and I want things to be different. Yeah. But they've come to different conclusions. Like the conclusion that I and other socialists and other anarchists have come to is the idea that like the problem is private, as well as the government. The problem is private ownership, and I'm just like, I fucking wish I could just convince these people to be as skeptical of like capitalists as they are of the government, and they would just like they would be socialists in that case.
The thing is, though, is that like I am skeptical, and I think I become increasingly skeptical as we reach a stage where these multinational organizations have like more power than some governments. So like my position wouldn't be that like corporations should have unlimited power, unlimited global reach. Like I don't believe in that. And I think, like I say, I'm probably becoming increasingly skeptical of the power that like Google holds, that Facebook, that Amazon has. Like I agree with you. And I completely agree with your point as well, is that like people on the libertarian right and people on like, I guess, the very socialist left actually, and this is something I'm super passionate about, probably have a lot of like common ground, probably a lot more than they actually realize, especially in terms of like the shared common goals and the things that they're disgruntled by in mainstream media. I think that there's so much common ground there. And actually, I think when you mix those political opinions and those things that you're unhappy about, you probably get some really interesting conversations and some really interesting like outcomes from them. But the problem is that those people never don't really talk to each other that much. Like conservatives will get conservatives on their shows, and left-wing guys will get left-wing guys on their shows.
I think the issue generally is that like same starting point, different conclusion. But like Dave, now that you're back, I was wanting to ask you because me and Joe have sort of like monopolized the conversation a bit. So you're left wing. Where do you fall in sort of in terms of like the role of government in a society?
That's a tough
what it should be.
I think ideally, if we're talking my sort of utopian principles, again to bring that back up, I'm very, very much in favour of personal liberty. I would probably fall more towards the left libertarian, anarchist sort of side of things. From a purely pragmatic point of view, though, I don't see how to bring that about without some kind of state involvement. I think that if the state were to just suddenly cease to exist, with things now as they are, with the complete imbalance in terms of wealth and power that we currently have, if government were to suddenly wink out of existence, something else would take its place, and that something else might not be any better, and could in fact be worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Proudhon thought that like the way to sort of actualize anarchism was to just for everyone to develop like anarchist principles, to develop the principles of like mutual aid and like an outlook that would allow an anarchist society to thrive, and then just sort of ignore the government, to just sort of like, because the government doesn't exist. That's the thing. It's a very like, I'm going a bit Max Stirner here, but like all of the ideas that our society is based on, concepts like money and private property and democracy and government, they don't actually exist. They're just sort of a thing. Like power is just the ability to make people to convince people to do what you say. And usually that's achieved by already having other people who will attack them if they don't do what you say. Like it's just like a sort of weird balancing act. So like I tend to take that outlook as like the way to achieve an anarchist society is just for us to reach to like to establish among the masses this idea that like just develop new ideas about how a society is run, and then just put those into practice and just sort of ignore like these older outdated ideas. Which is a problem because you have the police and the army who probably aren't going to get on board with that, and they have guns, which is one of the few things in a society that isn't the term is spook or spectre, but like guns are definitely a real thing, which is another like thing that the libertarian left has in common. We were just talking about this. The libertarian left has in common with the libertarian right. I fully support arming the proletariat. And that is the one thing that like America has that I wish the UK has, because like the government has guns. The populace does not in this country, which is a problem.
It's so funny how we reach like really similar conclusions, but like for different reasons. So like I agree. I actually fully agree with the right of the individual to, well, I guess to take the American phrase, like bear arms. But for me, that should be a case of like, that's to defend your family, your property, that sort of stuff. It's for nothing else. Like, so for me, I think you should be able to like own a gun, like not an insane like assault rifle, but like a handgun. But I also don't particularly think you should be able to take it out of your house. Like, and again, I actually agree with you as well. And like, it's a fundamentally like libertarian idea that like people should be able to hold government or any other kind of dangerous organization to account, like, and that should include be able to hold them to account by military means.
So yeah, I wish in America, because in America you've got this distinction between the liberal left, who's very anti-gun, and the conservative right, who's very pro-gun. But the thing is, the conservative right, as we've established, conservatives like things as they are. So the people who are the most armed aren't the people holding the government to account. They're the people defending the government, which is really fucking annoying.
Well, the right to bear arms was against the tyranny, wasn't it? So
well, the right to the thing is like America is an interesting example, because if you look at the history of the American, I don't even like calling it a revolution, the American War of Independence, it was like it was essentially like the capitalist bourgeoisie class like overthrowing the previous feudal order, which would be the pattern for other. This is me getting my history nerd on, but that would be the pattern for other like liberal revolutions throughout the 1800s. Is you have this property owning bourgeoisie class with the Industrial Revolution, and the like commoners who own land who want a say in government and don't like being taxed too heavily. But
there was
like
a big religious element to it as well.
there was a big religious, sort of, like the UK, the UK like was, or the Britain was heavily Protestant at that point, like America. It's not like it was Protestants versus Catholics, but like basically like the American revolutionaries, they weren't the underdogs. They were just the top dogs in America, as opposed to, and they didn't like being subservient to the top dogs in mainland Britain. As much as America likes to sort of cast itself as the underdog, it never really has been. As most evidenced by the fact that they're fighting this war about like the equality, based on these principles of like the equality of brotherhood, and all of the major revolutionary figures owned slaves.
Yeah.
It was like a French thing. It was based off like the French, the French ideals, right? Like of
No, the French Revolution was after.
Was it for sure?
Yeah, the Marquis de Lafayette, who's one of the major figures in the French Revolution. This is all based on, by the way, the Revolutions podcast by Mike Duncan, which is like the one source of history that I know, and I highly recommend it. But yeah, the people don't realize the French helped the Americas, but that was the French. That was the monarchy. That was Louis the XVI that was helping the Americans. The Marquis de Lafayette, who was one of the leaders in the French Revolution, fought in the American War of Independence.
I've seen Hamilton. I should know this.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, the French Revolution was similar. It was, a lot of them were like this idea of like liberal nobles who were like who wanted nobles to lead by the grace of their education and wealth, rather than by, by right of blood. There, in fact, wasn't like there wasn't a working class like member of the French government until like 1848, or it might have been 1878 actually. Was it the 18? Oh, I can't remember. No, it would have been 1870. Was it 1878? Sorry, I do this when I talk about history, is I try to remember specific dates. But the point is, like, when you look at the revolutions against the medieval like order that founded the modern world, it's not the populace, it's not like the commoners of, right? It's not like a peasant revolt you're talking about. You're talking about rich bourgeoisie landowners over, like, you're talking about the second most powerful group trying to overthrow the first most powerful group.
But that doesn't necessarily negate, like, or make their aims any less noble necessarily. Just because that's the group that's doing it, I don't feel like that. Like, so for me, like, the American War of Independence, Revolution, whatever you want to call it, was like it was built on like very, very noble aims, and that's not to say, because you're right, like the people who were organizing that revolution and formed the first government and stuff like that, they were all slave owners, so all men are born equal, like a bit hypocritical, but still, like, the fundamental principles on which that was built, for me, they're still good principles, regardless of who.
I'm sure there's good principles on either side, though, isn't there?
I think most of the principles you sort of hear about when you talk about like any of these revolutionary wars, but the American War of Independence especially, is it's basically propaganda. It's basically them coming up with ideals to justify material interest. And it's not that I don't think these leaders didn't genuinely believe in them, but I think it was the ideals they claimed to be fighting for were secondary to the material interest they were fighting for. And I think if you actually like look at the history of it, if you consider the fact, for example, that like the Native American population of the Americas generally sided with often sided with European monarchies because they got a better deal under those than they did under the settler governments within the Americas, and that's true all the way from like Canada to Argentina. Here's a fun fact: during the South American Revolutionary Wars, it was the Spanish government that was trying to get rid of the caste system, and it was the settled white population of the Americas that was that was one of the triggers for the South American Revolution, like War of Independence, is that they didn't like the Spanish government trying to make people in the Americas equal.
Mm.
Yeah, likewise one of the sort of causes in the build up to the American War of Independence was the British monarchy, King George at the time, who told the settlers they weren't allowed to settle west of the Appalachian Mountains, and they didn't like that. They didn't like that at all.
Okay.
Simon, I bet you didn't realise that we could go from banks to the.
Yeah, no, I was about to say, I was about to rein it in and actually
within
change
an hour.
topic.
Sorry,
No,
we've
that's
gone
good.
on
That's
such
going to
a
happen.
journey. I'll let you direct the topic.
Is
from
anyone
here.
else anything else to say on that matter? The right to bear arms or anything like that. Otherwise, I think we might move on.
I do think that the right to bear arms is a little
naive.
It's a little bit pointless if you're talking about arming people with guns. If you're talking about potentially going up against a government that has drones.
Yeah, and multiple other.
You're bringing a gun to a drone fight.
Yeah.
Could we take like a 5-minute break because I really need a slash and another beer.
Yeah, that's fine.
Beer as well.
Cool. I'm gonna put on a little bit of music, but we can chat at the same time.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Right.
Cool. Yeah, it got a little bit broad. That kind of became, didn't it? So
yeah, we went off on tangent.
Yeah, a little bit.
There a bit, didn't we?
I mean, that happened last time. I'm expecting it's going to happen from time to time.
Well,
but that's cool.
It's a conversation. It's what they do, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know when exactly I cut out. I don't know how long I was sat here talking.
You was halfway through a point, and Joe was about to jump in and discuss. I can't remember what it was actually specifically, but yeah, he was a bit bummed out that you couldn't also finish your statement, and he couldn't put his word in. But that's okay.
Across, yeah,
put his point across. But yeah, so I think next we might discuss, because I know I asked Joe, because obviously he seems to be the more opposed side in contrast to what us three are. Something either Brexit related. I know that's quite well, at the moment, especially with it.
That's a can of worms.
Yeah, exactly. That's going to be a little bit feisty, but I think we can move through that, I guess, and see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, let's see how it goes.
I think a lot of people in the chat are expecting a fight. Yeah, I like to keep it chill. It's a Friday evening, and I'm sure everyone's had a hard day at work or whatnot. So yeah, let's keep it going. Everyone's in good spirits. So
yeah,
and obviously we've all met some common ground as well, which is I always thought would happen anyway. In regards to most people who talk about politics, they align themselves with a certain leaning, but a lot of the time it does overlap, and yeah, it's refreshing almost to hear someone from the let's say, I know you're not right per se, Joe, but someone more right leaning, agreeing with left and vice versa. So yeah, I think
it's been really fun so far.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, one thing that I kind of didn't sort of a sort of bit of common ground that I kind of just didn't expect at all was the sort of the notion that
the nationalising the
well no not even that, but just the I'm trying to completely failing with my words here. The likening of government getting too powerful and private business getting too powerful, and the sort of common ground on we've sort of arrived at the same conclusion, but towards two different things, if that makes sense.
I think a lot of people arrive at that conclusion, but with different things as well. I think this is why a lot of people become really anti-religious, because they think like, well, maybe I do believe in God, but or whatever, but the Catholic Church sucks because it's so rich, it's so powerful, it does so many bad things, and some people direct it towards that, the monarchy, whatever it is. I think actually a lot of people reach the same conclusion, but like direct it at what they see as the most like damaging form of that.
I mean, a lot of that, obviously, there's a lot of good that happens, from religion as well. Obviously, it's more shown the bad stuff, which is going to be more discussed about and more in people's mind, and people are going to get passionate about that. So
there's no news like bad news.
Exactly.
Are we talking about religion now?
Well, we was going to start talking about Brexit, but I'm open to.
I'm fine to move on to Brexit. That was kind of just a sort of.
Oh, but I have so many opinions.
Oh yeah, religion.
I'm sure we all do.
Yeah. I was actually just before we actually move on to Brexit, I was actually brought up as a Mormon. So that's
really
quite yeah. So I've got a lot of since till the age of say 13, and then I started questioning loads of stuff.
Are you American?
No. There's the Church of Latter-day Saints. There's a church in Chichester and Portsmouth.
They're very geographically located, I would have thought, because it's very.
You'll be surprised.
Where I'm from, actually, up in Lancashire, there's actually quite a large Mormon population, and the largest Mormon temple in the UK is up there. Reason being that the American Mormons, like the original American Mormons, saw that as real sort of prime ground for to convert people, so they sent loads of missionaries over to northwest England.
Yep, my dad was a missionary. He went to Africa.
Mitt Romney's great granddad or something is from about 5 miles from where I grew up, because he was one of the settlers that then went back over with these missionaries. I
was raised Catholic, and I now describe myself. I pick agnostic on forums, but I usually describe myself as a misotheist, which is I'm fair. I can't really shake the belief that God exists. I'm just really angry about it.
I don't think anyone has the capacity to know if God is real. I don't think anyone has the capacity to prove it or disprove it. With our limited senses and our basic understanding.
When we move on to the next topic, by the way, Dave, you want to do the first word, because I feel really bad because you haven't had enough of a chance to speak yet.
It's cool. I've said plenty. I mean, even though I got cut off halfway through it and just.
Yeah, I think Joe.
Talking to myself for God knows how long before I realised.
Joe, you wanted to jump in on a point that he was making. Do you remember what that would be, or do you want to rehash that just for a second?
No, it's cool. I think the moment's
okay.
No,
that's fine.
We can, if it's going to come back up again, I'm sure it will come up again organically, and we can just move on from there.
Sorry, I'm really bad for that.
That's all good. Okay, so in regards to Brexit, who wants to start off? Where would you like to start? The initial referendum before that, what are you pointing at?
Who are you pointing at? You're pointing at Simon, from what I can see.
You're pointing at
Dave. Oh, you can't. Oh, we have
that's
screen.
Yeah, because Dave left and whatnot. So, what's the starting point? Initial. David Cameron or what's?
I almost don't want to touch this one.
It's all chill here. You can speak your mind.
No. I almost don't know where to start with it.
Exactly.
Yes. What a mess.
Yeah, and
what
it's
a horrible,
still a mess.
Awful mess.
Yeah. Actually, I would like to actually hear what Joe has to say. Obviously, because he's. I'm guessing, that you were in the Leave voters pool.
Yeah. Yeah. So, fuck. This really is a big topic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you background on, I guess, where I come at this issue from, how I acted on it, and how I feel resultantly.
Yeah. I mean, can you first describe what was the first instance that you heard of Brexit?
So I guess Brexit as Brexit.
Before it's called Brexit, I guess.
Up to the referendum, but so I'm from Salisbury originally, which probably won't surprise you guys, given how fucking posh I sound. But around there, it's always been strong. There's always been loads of Eurosceptics. I guess we've had Conservative MPs for I think since there's been a fucking seat in Salisbury.
Can you
So
ascertain?
I've always, I guess, been aware of like Euroscepticism, and it's always been quite like a big thing around like where I've grown up.
Can I just ask why you think that is?
Salisbury, wealthy place.
Yeah, but the information and stuff like that has come about, and you know how people came to be that.
I guess it's very traditional, right? Like places like, I think people always make a big like a bigger deal about, I guess, like the north of England voting for Brexit, which is true. A lot of big towns, like I guess like the left behind like towns and cities up in the north did vote for Brexit, but fundamentally that referendum was won in the south, in like leafy Surrey, Kent, Wiltshire, Hampshire, those kind of places. Hampshire is a bit more of a mix, but I think did vote for Brexit just about overall. So I think they're like the fundamentally like conservative, affluent, less averse to change, and they're the places I think that would rather see less change in government, society, and probably less interference from a foreign power, the European Union. Probably want to see things more how they were, as opposed to how they potentially could be in the future. So I think that's always been, and probably always is going to be in places like Salisbury. That's going to be the case. Like it's probably not going to change too much.
It's a little ironic, don't you think, about saying how you're averse to change and yet have voted for one of the biggest changes.
Yeah,
in the last half century, really. It's
isn't it? Because this is exactly
an irony there.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's really interesting. I think it's exactly how Leave ended up winning. Is they ended up pitching staying in the EU as a bigger change and as a bigger threat than actually leaving. They managed to convince that the actual greater danger was in staying in the EU as opposed to actually leaving it. Now, like for me, like I voted Brexit, I think for a number of reasons, some philosophical, some practical. Like I don't particularly believe that government is very good at like doing much at all. So I don't think that like a Europe-wide super government is also going to be particularly good at doing much either. And I think they probably proved themselves to be particularly ineffective, like with the launch of the euro, with a lot of the things that they've done since with bailouts and a lot of other things that I think the European Union probably hasn't done that well. So I probably didn't want to see any more of that. I think as well, for me, I've always thought that an immigration system based on you can come to the UK, but as long as you're like from Europe, that seems weird. And like to some extent seems quite racist to me. Whereas I think we should be fulfilling job gaps where we need them from the best places in the world that can supply those workers. So if we've got a shortage of nurses, but actually there are some seriously well-trained Nigerian nurses that can fill that, I think they should kind of take precedent over, I guess, unskilled French or Italian people coming over to the country and not offering, I guess, like as much to the economy. But yeah, so I think that's, I guess there are like probably quite a lot of other things. I think that the EU, there are a lot of problems with it as an institution. It's so bloated, it's so bureaucratic. I don't want to say it's undemocratic because it's not. It is a democratic organization, but there are some seriously undemocratic aspects to it when you look at the European Commission. Like we elect our MEPs, but actually still by far some of the most powerful positions within the European Union are still unelected. I think what people found is actually they weren't seeing the direct, I use this word a lot, but like the net benefit of being part of the European Union enough. And I think that's why you got a weird coalition of the wealthy South and then the kind of the left behind manufacturing kind of towns and cities in the North, because they're both the places that really struggle to see the positive impact of the EU, whereas I guess a place like London probably feels that a lot more, and it is why it kind of overwhelmingly voted to stay within the European Union.
It's definitely more integrated cities, more multicultural cities.
Yeah, I think you say places that didn't see the benefits voted to leave, but then you look at places like Devon and Cornwall overwhelmingly voted leave. and I think I don't know how many hundreds of millions of pounds they've received from the directly from the EU, and they've now they've gone now cap in hand to the UK government saying, yeah, can we still have that money that we were getting from the EU, and been told been sent packing basically. So I do think that there is a large element of people being well, I'm not going to mince my words, being conned a little bit into it. It's I mean, don't get me wrong. I am no huge fan of the EU itself. As you say, there are parts of it that are not democratic at all. There are parts of it that are bloated and inefficient. I voted Remain reluctantly. I think either way, there were no good options in that referendum. I don't think. What?
Sorry, you were saying?
Sorry.
What was that?
No, keep going. I'm just like very tense. Keep going.
So sorry. I will wrap up. But,
no,
you can
keep going.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear what you're thinking.
I think it's we're better off in than out. I don't particularly like it as an institution. I'm not a fan of the neoliberal capitalist nature of it. And you're quite right in that it's exclusionary to people from outside of Europe. The problem being that we are now outside of it. And what about all of the the people that could go and from this country and move to abroad to the rest of to the EU, which we now can't.
Well, people that already
I find it really interesting in that, like, it's a really good point you raise that the EU is so super kind of neoliberal capitalist. Like, the EU has always traditionally, and still is now, a place for people with big financial or big businesses, big lobbying organizations to get together to lobby politicians to do what they want. That's always what it's been about, and it's as much that today as it was sort of 20 years ago. It's why I find it really interesting how people on the left, not like the hard left, but on like the left generally, like people who would consider themselves progressives, are so pro EU, when like the EU is literally the epitome of like neoliberal capitalism. Like it's that incarnate.
That's because they're earlier.
Yeah, the centre left are neoliberals. They are capitalists.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. They're just soft capitalists.
So we want to get onto the impact that is likely to happen once Brexit is sorted out. Obviously,
once it's
we're at the hands.
Once it happens.
well, I guess once it happens. I don't know if it ever gets sorted out properly, would it? So, sorry, Bunton?
Yeah, sorry, it's just if I don't say this, I think I'll explode. Okay, so, like, it's fucking weird being a leftist during that. Because, like, when the Brexit referendum happened, I was still broadly liberal. Like, I voted Remain. I regret that decision now, because my views have sort of progressively, like, drifted towards the left. And it's a fucking weird position to have right now. Because here's the thing. Fuck the EU, but also fuck Brexit.
We're at the hands of the Conservatives now, so
I despise the like basically every UK government we've had in my entire lifetime. They're all the same neoliberal fuckers. I despise the EU as well. I hate them all, and I don't want to trade one for the other. Like, you see behind me, there's the poster, like the Scottish Socialist Party poster for an independent socialist Scotland. Emphasis very much on the socialist. Like, even an independent Scottish government, like, fuck the SNP as well. And it's weird because, like, my existence, like, my political views really confuse people who don't sort of understand that there is a position outside liberal, progressive, pro-EU, and right-wing conservative anti-EU.
Well, there's a level of nuance that people don't get, isn't there? Or don't want to understand. to most
And it's weird
people.
because like that's what Jeremy Corbyn's position was before he sort of like folded into like the before he went Remain, because that was the niche that he had to go for. And like the thing is, like I don't support sort of any sort of government infrastructure, but like a government that was dedicated towards like employee ownership, like what, not to be bitter about it, but what a Labour government would have been post 2019, like that's something I'll accept as a sort of transition stage. And the thing is, like, Brexit is a fucking mess, and it's carried out like the Brexit. Let's not like kid ourselves. The people who voted for Brexit, it was not carried out in their interests. It was carried out in order to sort of as a vote winner, and it worked. It was carried out like to sort of appeal to. Do you remember earlier, Dave? You were disconnected during this, but we were talking about how the libertarian right comes from the same sort of stock as the socialist left. They are left behind people who want something to change.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, it's easier to sell people on fuck the EU than it is on fuck capitalism. And it's also like the Tories don't want to sell people on fuck capitalism because they're pro-capitalism, but they could leave the EU, even if they're sort of internally divided about that. And that's the sort of tragedy of it to me, is that like it's people who know that they want change, they know that something is wrong and that something has to change, but the sort of like public image campaign is so tightly controlled that they're almost not allowed to see what the actual problem is.
Yeah.
And instead they're told, oh no, it's because of Europe, it's because of like internationalism, and it's because of, okay, let's put this on the table. Some of the people, like, I'm gonna do a bit here. Some of the people who voted for leaving the EU are racist, but let's just like put that on the table and just fucking kick it out and fucking like get rid of that, because that doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that like whether it's driven by like base racism or driven by like genuine concerns about like internationalism and globalism, it doesn't matter. The point to me is that like people have been told to blame this thing, and it's just a sort of distraction from the actual issues that people face.
But you're looking at this in such a holistic way. Like, I agree with you, actually. I agree that people are either looking for or feel there is something to blame for their situation, and the EU was passed up as something. But why can't it be that the EU is one of the things that's wrong, and then we can deal with that, and then we can continue to deal with other
it is.
things?
I just don't think that, like, it is absolutely one of the things that's wrong. I just don't think that, like, what we're getting post-Brexit is going to be any better, and in fact it's going to be worse because it's so mismanaged. I don't think anyone like disagrees with that.
Yeah, I don't think like the people involved in organising, you know, obviously everything around it has been incompetent to the point of, you know, criminality. It's crazy how we've allowed these people just to, you know, sign stuff that they don't understand and just do what they want, basically.
Break international fucking treaties.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, how can... There's no accountability, and they're getting away with it. And I don't personally see many people on the right side understanding that. Obviously, left as well, to some degree.
I think that it's definitely, like, you know, the EU is, as it currently is, as a capitalist neoliberal organisation, is definitely part of the problem. The problem with Brexit is it doesn't make the EU go away. It doesn't mean that we're not affected by the EU, because guess what? It's still 20 miles off the Kent coast.
Mm-hmm. If you had a comprehensive...
It's still our nearest neighbour. It's still where we're going to be doing most of our trade. But all these talks of, you know, fantastic trade deals with the rest of the world, we are still going to do most of our trade with Europe because it's right there.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the idea would be that... Sorry, I interrupted. Go for it.
No, and it's just that there are two possibilities with Brexit, realistically. One is the so-called soft Brexit, which would have seen us kind of staying broadly aligned to them, basically like Norway. And the problem with that is nothing really changes because Norway de facto is in the EU. All of their regulations, all of their laws are dictated by the EU because they have to be if they want to do business with the EU, if they want to be part of the free trade area.
Yeah.
Now, that was what was sold to people by and large like during the referendum campaign, was that kind of soft Brexit. Oh, it'll be all right. But that kind of Brexit is completely pointless because it's not really Brexit. All we're doing there is giving up our seat at the table that decides where these rules are made.
The amount you contribute would be low.
How these rules are made. The other option, which is what we seem to be going for, is the complete, just cut everything off, hardest of hard Brexits, World Trade Organization rules Brexit, and there's no grey area in between. It was sold that there was a grey area in between the two. There isn't. It's a light switch between the two, because if you want to have some of the benefits, you have to have the responsibilities and the obligations that go with it. You can't pick and choose, because if at the moment we start saying, well, we want the benefits of the free market trade area, we still want access to that. The EU turns around and says, yeah, that's fine, you can have that, but you've got to have freedom of movement. It's like, oh no, we don't want freedom of movement. Oh, well, you can't have access to the free trade area. Well, why not? Well, if you think about the EU like a club, if they start giving us what would be, from a lot of Brexit's points of view, a better deal of, free market access but no freedom of movement, then the freedom of movement is an obligation from that in that. And if the other EU countries that are still a member of the club are suddenly going to go, well, hang on, they're not even a member anymore and they're getting a better deal than we are. The EU is never, ever, ever going to agree to that. And, right for right or wrong, they have all of the power in that. This is why I don't like it, because they are too big and they're too powerful. At the same time, I'm a fan of anything that engenders cooperation across borders.
Yeah.
Because for me, I don't like the idea of borders. I think the entire concept of nation states is toxic. Yeah. But that's another matter, and that's a tangent that we maybe shouldn't go off on if we're still talking Brexit.
Well,
the other, because there are so many sticking points that they say we can't have a hard border in Ireland. It's like, right, well, if you don't want a hard border in Ireland, then you have to have freedom of movement, which means you have to have it doesn't work. It just doesn't. It's so completely contradictory, and and as Bunton, you were saying before about how not everybody that voted for Brexit is right wing and conservative, because they're not. You've got sort of giant figures of the left like Dennis Skinner on side, wanting out of Europe, and it's made it for these very uneasy bedfellows. But yes, Brexit itself as a concept, yes, let's leave the EU, got a majority. No one can deny that.
Just about, but yeah.
But just about. 52-48, that's still a majority.
Yeah.
Let's not split hairs. But if you then break down the people that voted for Brexit, try and get a majority, try and get that 52% to agree to what Brexit should look like. You can't do it.
They needed the information, didn't they, really?
It's impossible. Brexit itself is so completely contradictory that it can never ever work, which is why I voted for Remain, because it was the only option on the ballot that logically works.
Does this not trouble you, though, that you can become a member of the European Union and you can never leave because it will never work. That for me is a troubling notion. That if you join the European Union, you can never leave, or you will go through a British Brexit style.
No, completely, absolutely. That is a big, that is a massive problem.
Again,
but
I think
that's not a problem that's solved by us leaving.
It's also not a problem that's solved by us staying.
It's counterintuitive, I know, but the only way that we could have, we're so tied into it that even the most competent government of actual experts, which, let's face it, we don't have, no government could have made it work, because we're so tied into it, and the only way it could have worked would have been to stay in,
try and change it.
And try and change it from within, which I know is what a lot people don't like that, because it's too long term. It's too vague.
This thing of like, oh, we don't negotiate with terrorists, and it's like
we should like
this is another thing. It's like it feels like some of us should disagree on this, but I think we're all on the same page. And it's like, fuck, like, yes, the EU is actively set up so that leaving is a massive fucking ball ache for everyone.
Yeah.
But like it's one of those things where it's like someone is pointing a gun at you and saying, don't do this or I'll shoot you. And it's like, well, I'm not gonna like bow down to that. I'm not gonna acknowledge that. I'm gonna do the thing, and they shoot you anyway. It's like you still get shot. Like you can stand up for your principles, but you're still getting shot at the end of the day. Like they still have the gun.
Sorry, I've said enough.
Go on, Joe.
You
can go after Dave, it's fine.
No, it's all right. Yeah, I think what I was going to say is that, like, I don't think leaving is impossible, and I don't think that leaving with a good, I don't want to say a good deal or sound like fucking Donald Trump or something, but I think like leaving with good outcomes, like, I don't think that's impossible either. I think we all agree that this has been mismanaged by a bunch of clowns, and we've seen essentially three prime ministers try this, right? Because essentially Cameron was the one that started off the process. Theresa May.
Yeah, I forgot David Cameron used to exist.
Yeah, I mean, he's involved in this. Like, for me, this is a side point.
God, it's been so long.
I know.
It's been so long.
If he called that referendum, he should have been the guy who fucking literally had seen it through. If you call that referendum, you have to deal with the results.
Oh, yeah.
And it would have been... I think, say what you like about Cameron, and I'm sure you guys probably have a lot to say about Cameron, but I think he was a considerably more competent Prime Minister than Boris Johnson.
He certainly wore
most
the
people
suit.
would be, yeah.
Same with like Obama. It's like we've left the era of politicians that wear suits.
Yeah, he's like a professional Prime Minister. Boris Johnson's not a professional Prime Minister. He's more of a showman. And that's good for winning elections, but it's not particularly good for governing a country.
Yeah.
And so first of all, I think Cameron should have been the guy to go, right, I called this, I should see this through, but he didn't. He fucked off, and that was the first thing that annoyed me about the process. But I still think it's
whoever he handed his resignation letter into should have just said to him, "No,
you're fucking saying right there. You sorted it out."
But like Dave, your point on freedom of movement, I thought was interesting because, well, I think it's, without sounding rude, I think it's wrong because the EU have since, they set out their stall pretty early and said, we will not accept free trade terms unless you accept freedom of movement. They've since moved on that. Like they have moved on that. And now actually we are trying to negotiate a free trade arrangement outside of, being within is it still called the European Economic Area?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's new. That's news to me. I'll have to.
I mean, it's all just a dick. It's all just a big dick measuring contest between people in suits. I read the news about like EU negotiations. It's always like the Daily Express are still like the ones that are talking about it all the time. But I always just read about it and I'm like, I hate all of these bastards.
It's so jingoistic as well, the way it's reported, and especially
it is, and the EU are as bad as the UK because the EU are constantly slagging off the British.
And the
British,
totally.
It's exactly that. It's a dick measuring competition, and it's It's got so annoying. There's so many egos involved, but I just think, to be fair, it could have been done with the right people. It could have been done. I think there could have been a good agreement reached, and we could have all moved on with our lives. And another reason for me voting to leave, I think, I do think there's big untapped economic potential in the global markets that we haven't been able to do. Like, it is true that while you're a member of the EU, you cannot negotiate free trade arrangements with other countries. And that's not to say that, the EU arranges good trade arrangements with other countries. It's done one with Canada a couple of years ago. It's done a good one with Japan. But we would be free to, I guess, explore some of that economic potential from across the globe. And I guess my overarching point is that this could have been done, and this could have been done better. I voted to leave, but I really don't want the people who are currently running it or have been running Brexit for the last 4 years to be the ones in charge, because they're the guys that have fundamentally fucked this up.
Well, so a lot of people on the left have predicted that it would be run like this, which is a lot of why people voted.
Because the people that are now in charge were the people that ran the Leave campaign,
which lied to God knows extent.
This is their, it always. And talk about Boris Johnson. You could go back 20 years, and he's, a lot of the stuff about that has led to this kind of feeling of sort of the anti-EU feeling, and not the legitimate stuff. I'm talking the straight bananas and the all that stuff. That stuff was, you could trace a lot of that back to Boris Johnson himself. Back to the early 90s, when he was I believe it's the Telegraph's Brussels correspondent, when it was a boring assignment, and on slow news days he would literally just make shit up.
But it's funny, I agree with you. Like, some of this, literally, you only need to spend 5 minutes reading about Boris Johnson's career to look at some of the ridiculous things that he has made up. But at the same time, there were legitimate concerns about the EU. Like one of them, for example, that Leave voters were kind of routinely taking the piss out for was, they said, the European Union is going to form a European military force. And everyone was like, no, this is never going to happen. Nick Clegg was going, no, this is never going to happen. And it's literally happening right now. Like, if
why is that a bad thing, though? Necessarily, why is it a bad thing? I'm no fan of.
It's a collective interest, isn't it?
As I'm not a fan of the EU, I'm not a fan of NATO, I'm not a fan of Russia, I'm not a fan of any of them really. But why is?
We already had NATO, so that's not much of that's a step down from NATO.
I guess it doesn't really matter whether you're against it or for it. We didn't ask to be in it. Like, when the EU, this is why I think the referendum was completely valid. It was a completely valid question to raise with the British public, is that the European Union now, or 4 or 5 years ago, is a completely different beast than the one we voted to join. Like, that was just back then it was based on trade, and that's what we voted to join. So I think it's completely valid that the question was put to the British public. Do you want to remain part of this thing that is now a much bigger thing? It's a political entity. It's potentially a military power. It's all these other things combined and rolled into one. So for me, it's not necessarily whether it's a good or bad thing, but the EU just does these things. It wants deeper integration. It wants to become a much larger political entity than it is. And it does all these things without asking us. It does all these things regardless of whether MEPs vote for it or not. It just goes about doing it. And that, for me, again, I think it's quite dangerous.
Again, nothing. It feels like you should be saying things that either of us disagree with. But I don't think anything you've said so far is something that anyone on the hard left would actually disagree with, which is really weird. If I can have a left moment, I think the thing that most pisses me off about the EU referendum is the fact that there was never an actual left Brexit position. The left sort of. The mainstream left sort of collectively decided this is untenable. We have to align ourselves with the sort of liberal progressive position. And it's if I can sort of give you an insight into what it's like to be a leftist, it's often said that the main enemy of the left is not fascists or even right-wing conservatives, but liberal progressives who sort of absorb the left because the left has no one else to vote for. And I kind of 2019 kind of hammered home that's very much the case. Like in the Scottish Socialist Party, I've like talked to people. I talked to the guy who used to be my MSP, and like his main sort of takeaway with that was like Corbyn sort of betrayed his own principles by aligning himself with Remain, because he was a Eurosceptic.
Yeah.
And that is the thing, is like the fact that the liberal progressives who are not really left wing get to sort of decide what the voice of the left is one of the biggest fucking headaches for anyone on the hard left.
Yeah.
And I guess also like the voice of the like the whole EU referendum was so weird, because you ended up with like you said earlier, Dave, like the weirdest people working together. Like you had essentially Labour and the mainstream of the then mainstream of the Conservative Party working together. You had Nigel Farage touring the country with what's the name of that female Labour MP?
I can't remember her name, but yes, I know who you mean.
You know the one. Like you had such a weird thing, and it was probably and I found it really interesting, if a little strange, that it was the first time that like these traditional political divides across the country like changed, and like battle lines were completely rearranged as well. And I found that really interesting, and that I think has continued to shape politics as we see it now, because I think what you saw in the most recent election was almost a continuation of that Brexit referendum. Basically, it was for the same lines in the same places of the country, and that's why I think you have to, whether it has like the staying power. My personal opinion is I don't think it will. I don't think those lines and those loyalties have the same staying power. But we'll see. Like time will tell.
I mean, the two, like, I agree. Like, this is a blip. It's a big blip, but it's still like, in 10 years' time, the two main divisions are going to be the old stream, like the old like political divisions going back to like the 1800s of like Labour and Conservatives, and the Lib Dems are there for some reason as well.
The Whigs, right?
But like the two main like political axes, I guess, are going to be the old political divisions and positions on climate change, which is going to be like the big thing, is increasingly like the big thing in the future. But let's not get into that, because that's a whole other topic.
That's another stream. That's next Friday.
Yeah,
it's gonna have to be, I think.
I will say it is. Are
you about to go into it?
It is gratifying that I haven't heard anything about Nigel Farage in the last 6 months, but I guess that's just because of COVID.
That's true. Yeah, that is true.
No,
all I have.
All I've heard from him is that he got visited by the police because they told him off for going and stand on the White Cliffs or something. But funnily enough, he doesn't like lockdown.
Surprising.
That's another blip. That's another like political axis that like appears in the mist, is like position on like lockdown, which is like you have like everyone from like Jeremy Corbyn's brother to like
Jesus! Have you seen him in
InfoWars?
Alex Jones.
Alex Jones, and it's just like it's another one of those things where it's like anything the government does is bad, but it's just like it is one of those things where it's like it does, because like I'm a socialist. I'm supposed to care about like my position is supposed to be based on systemic understanding of the populace. And the sensible part of my brain does agree with that. You know, when people don't wear masks, when they don't practice social distancing, it's because of a lack of education. It's because of a lack of like the ability of like it's because it hasn't been properly communicated to them. And like the part of my brain that like is rational acknowledges that. But then I go to the shops and some fucking kid comes up to me and stands so close to me I can feel him breathing down my neck, and all these old bastards are walking around without masks, and I have to like go to a different aisle and go around the shop to get back to where I was, and I'm just like, fuck. Just fuck.
Yeah.
Just fuck.
Well, a lot of it is obviously propaganda online.
I get that. It's like as you know, sort of a socialist myself, you know, feeling that yes, I have to feel, the entire politics is sort of based around the good, the greatest good for the most people, and but then you go out and you just think, why the fuck do I care about you again?
You feel like the odd one out with a mask and no one else is half the time. I go down to the shop and yeah, it's crazy. It's becoming more obviously with the
I've
legislation.
got like an actual pack of masks.
Yeah, that's
here.
what I got. £5 from Tesco's. That's a bit of a.
I got one of these as well.
Box of
But like they sell these, and this is another, like, if we can get back on the subject of capitalism exploiting people, these are fucking useless. The only use for these is if you're going to like burn down a police station and you want to cover your identity, because these aren't actually like
Might come in handy.
Well, these don't have any like hygienic use. These are just like they sell them as well because they have to say that they are fashion accessories, because they don't actually like these are actually designed so that they like absorb moisture particles when you breathe them out. This is just a bit of cloth. So I got this out of like the co-op. I don't even like wear this anymore. I have another one that I got of a vending machine that's actually quite useful.
I've got one with a filter interchangeable thing, so when the moisture comes in.
Yeah, those are good.
Yeah, that's what I got.
Welcome to Mask Talk.
Yeah, I can't. If someone had said to us 12 months ago that this would be a thing, well,
it's such a weird. Like, I know the subject what were we talking about before? Like Brexit, but now we're on to COVID. Sorry. But like, it is a weird thing. It's one of those things where it's like, it's weird because you're sort of living through history. And like, what was the last like version? I guess Brexit was the last version of this.
9/11 before that, maybe.
Yeah, but like the 2008 financial crash, all the way back to like 9/11, the moon landing before that. But it is this weird thing of like, in 10 years, people aren't going to really remember this, but they'll have a vague sense that this is a thing that happened. And
I think they're constantly talk about this. This is a hot topic.
I reckon biggest thing biggest event in my lifetime.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
There's always a big event.
Life-changing event, at least.
The 2008 financial crash, like that was a big thing, but like now it's a thing. Everyone sort of knows about it, but we move on because it's no longer an active part of our life, and we'll do that with COVID as well. Like, even if whether the disease is eradicated or whether it continues to be a part of it, won't be. But like it'll just become a normal part of our life, and like we'll all be old fucks like sitting around, and there'll be some kids being like, "What was it like back in the back in like 2020 or whatever year it was?" And we'll just be like, it was I can tell you stories.
We just spit in people's faces and no one cared. Right.
No one gave a shit. That was the takeaway of.
You could stand right next to people.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you didn't want us talking about COVID, Simon.
No. You're good. I mean, if you want to get back to Brexit, that's fair game.
I remember you were talking about doing the stream earlier, and I was like, I want this to be quite structured this time.
Well, yeah. I mean, compared to last time, I mean, incrementally the streams are arguably becoming more structured. But yeah, it's as I said, it's going to be free reigns.
Oh, it's reminding me of when I do like
Simon, if you're interested.
What was that? Sorry.
I said I've got some cats that need herding if you're interested.
Oh yeah.
Like whenever I used to go to like party meetings, I would always be the one that like brought up totally irrelevant subjects, and I'd always be there being like, "Oh, I have a point." Just not sure whether to raise my hand or not.
I've got a point. Can we talk about like AI, or like is this for this, or like?
Okay.
I find it weird though that we all managed to like have a conversation about Brexit, and I feel like even though we are all over the shop politically, like fuck me, if you've got some spectrum, it's like that.
That's the thing though, we haven't hit on a single subject where we actually like properly disagree, which is really weird for me.
Business banks is probably the biggest discrepancy, I would say.
Should we then discuss?
Like, you were talking about how you don't really approve of like big privately owned banks.
So I don't approve. It's the lack of trust. But I don't trust anyone, man. I don't trust like my friends. I don't trust my parents.
Jesus. Okay, so in that respect, go on, Dave. You say it quick.
Sorry, no. This is exactly it. This is why every one of these systems is kind of you have to pick the least bad option, and for me, having something where there are kind of as many people involved in there's a process that goes through making the decision, and everyone gets a say, and everyone gets that's kind of the least bad solution to me, I guess.
Isn't that a Winston Churchill? Is it Winston Churchill?
I'm paraphrasing. I think he said of capitalism that capitalism is the worst system in the world apart from all the others.
I thought that was democracy.
Or it might have been democracy. It was something like that, yeah.
What you're describing is basically like, that's literally what you're saying right now, is like democracy is, this is the least bad option, is everyone gets a say.
Yeah, because the only alternative is people don't, is no one does, really.
Okay, so
if you get to the point where people start cutting off, certain people don't have a say, then you might as well have, no one does, and then you end up with
dictatorship or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, which essentially is what you have with capitalism, up to a point. Is a business gets
if there's a
enough,
veneer of a veil of people being able to affect.
When you vote with your dollar, the rich get more votes. That's the sort of summary line.
Yeah. You end up with this situation where say at work, you go to work. Is work a democracy? If you're your own boss, great. But if not, then what your boss says goes, and it's not a democracy.
Yeah, bureaucracy.
Okay. Sorry, we seem to have kind of gone off topic.
No, it's cool. I was going to move on to basically in regards to obviously our overlapping views on a lot of things. What do you think the cause, in large part, would be? Because people are uneducated and they seem to be devised. It's something that things like social media, even just politicians going on campaigns and stuff like that. What do you believe is the most detrimental, and what do you think we can do to change it for the better?
Well, to be honest,
you go for it, man.
Well, no, I was going to say, okay, I'm 22. I'm borderline between millennial and Gen Z, I think is the newest one. But people talk, I hear a lot, this is a talking point, is, oh, we're so politically divided these days. And it's one of those things that I have very little reference point for, because this has always sort of been my reality. I wasn't alive and conscious for a point where everyone sort of, I'm not even sure what the alternative is. Was there a point where because I don't know how old you guys are or what your sort of background is, but there was never a point where everyone was politically on the same page. And in a sense, I'm not opposed to strong political division, because what is the alternative? Everyone from what I understand, in the 80s, maybe you had this era where everyone basically agreed about capitalism good, USSR bad,
for a bit.
And I'm not necessarily of the opinion that people taking strong divisive political positions is a bad thing.
Dude, I literally couldn't agree with you more, and it's super rare to hear that, and actually really refreshing as well, because so I'm 29 and also don't particularly remember a time when the country wasn't divided. You've always had in this country conservative against Labour, or back in the day Tory against Whig, whatever it is. You've always had a deeply divided country where roughly 50% of the country votes for something and roughly 50% of the country votes for the other thing, and then there's a third party in the background somewhere. That's kind of always been the case, and I find it weird that the current, I guess, how newspapers or the media put it is the country's so divided, it's more divided than it's ever been. It's not. And even if it is, division is fairly healthy. Like, I mean, I bring it back to competition, but I guess it's like competition of ideas. For me, like, I think the best ideas will always tend to float to the top, and the shit ideas will sink to the bottom. I think like it's not bad to have a society where your ideas are consistently conflicting, and you're hopefully persuading people of your opinion and all that other stuff. What I think becomes more difficult, I think like political discourse has become a lot worse. Like, I think people don't have these conversations, and I think you get social media bubbles where people on the left or people on the right will only hear their friends or their co-workers, or basically people from exactly the same socioeconomic or demographic backgrounds talking about exactly the same thing, and you're led to believe that
they're the enemy or something.
That's what the entire country believes. And like it was I noticed it the most like in the last election, probably, where like, all the pollsters, all of the newspapers, everyone was predicting it was probably going to be like a conservative, not landslide like it was, but like a majority. And all of my friends were like, nah, because all I see is my friends talking about how they're going to go vote Labour, because obviously the vast majority of my friends are Labour voters. And I was like, no, this is just because you follow 300 Labour supporters on your Twitter and they all agree with exactly what you say. And it's like, it's the same with almost everything, is that actually people are consistently, and this is the left and the right and people on the center ground, they're consistently preaching to the converted. They're not listening to other opinions. I think the best thing you can do is to listen to as many opinions as possible, even if you fucking hate those opinions. Like, try and listen to them, try and understand where people are coming from. Like, and it's not necessarily the division that is actually causing like this negative effect within our political discourse. I think it's a lack of actually listening, and social media platforms like Twitter make it so much worse, because like, I think some of the best conversations you can have, they are not done in 140 characters. They're not done in however many Twitter is now, 280. Like, they're done over hours, and it can get fucking dull.
It's not just that I'm right,
really
you're
good
wrong
thing to do, like long form debate where you really explore an idea and draw it out, like we're doing now, or like plenty of other like podcasts do. Like, that's the way to do it, but everything has become so reductive and so short form and catchphrase, and it's like fucking pop politics where you try and get your points across in like 5 words but don't listen to the response.
People miss out on the nuance, don't they? That's what it is. They just think I'm on one side.
Just kind of riffing off that, have you noticed that like one of the things that I think is one of the main problems of this is you get things like, I think I know the BBC do it, I think most of the other major sort of news sites do it as well, is they will have a bit where it'll say it will be a current event, a story about it, and it says like, and it'll be this story in 100 words.
Yeah.
You can't do it in 100 words.
Yeah, a lot of newspapers, online articles, and that are just a paragraph or two, and it doesn't give you the important information.
Yeah. The best things that I see the BBC and the Guardian do really, really well is when they do their like, I can't remember one of them calls it like a long read, or maybe they both call it long read.
Yeah.
Like really explorative journalism on the Guardian does it particularly well, and I have a lot of issues with the Guardian as a newspaper, but I still read it. But their long reads are phenomenally good. Like, whoever does that, it must be like a collection of journalists rather than just one person. But even if I don't agree with like the crux of what they're saying, they're always incredibly well done, and it will take like 20 minutes of your time. It's not an article that you whiz through in half a minute, but you feel so much more enlightened and informed after doing it. Even if you still disagree, you understand at least where that person's coming from, the context and the background and the references.
I mean, talking about division, it's interesting. Bunton, you made the example of saying that everyone agreed in the 1980s. They didn't. They really didn't.
You're right. They didn't.
You've got the whole thing with even Labour, they had exactly the same problems, as they've got now with, this sort of like talks of the hard left, and militant tendency and all the rest of it. And sort of, I'm. Do
you remember the IRA?
I do. Well, I'm not quite old enough to really remember the age. I'm 34, but I do remember the IRA. I remember the Manchester bomb. My dad was actually in Manchester on the day of the bomb. He was nowhere near it. But he was there, and but it was, I totally remember the IRA, at least the tail end of it, and I I think this kind of we did kind of, it's right in saying there has always been a kind of a political divide, and the 1980s were very politically divided. It's probably the most recent time when when there was such a broad spectrum at least being talked about, even if not necessarily agreed with, or but you had everything from militant tendency on the far left right through to the National Front on the far right. Not that that's a good thing, but they were all
back in the 1940s. You had the fucking black shirts.
I know, and there were always these fringe movements, and that was probably the time when they the most recent time when they were as prominent as they are now. They're probably more prominent now than they were then. And I think it's with the fall of the USSR, Western politics in particular, we got very complacent and very homogenized and very much, well, we've won now. Capitalism has won, and that is it forever. And and you ended up with the with New Labour under Tony Blair, I know. Tell me about it. Basically, kind of started that the Tories in red ties, I call them.
Yeah.
But they became very, very homogenous, and you talk about even with Labour's massive landslide in '97, they still didn't get more than half the votes. Boris Johnson this time got something 40-ish%, 44 was it % of the votes, and ended up with an 80-seat majority. And it's again, at the risk of going off on a tangent, the only way that we can kind of move away from that and get political discourse back is, I think, to do away with the first past the post system and have proportional representation. And the thing that people they always the argument that I always get heard that gets put against proportional representation is, oh well, it just leads to too many coalition governments. But that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Plenty of countries manage
if they're effective.
Yeah, most do.
I live in Scotland, and in the Scottish elections, we have proportional representation, and it is fucking brilliant.
Although you somehow managed to get SNP majorities, though, which even though it seemed that there were claims at one point that it was designed so that you could never get a majority, but there they go. But
it's
just
funny
because we had one coalition government and it was an absolute shower, doesn't mean that they're all like that. And
I mean, the thing is that the one coalition government we had was between two parties who were politically on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. There's no compromise. Was when you start the only way you can kind of start getting a less divisive society is when you actually get people, as you say, of from different sides of the political spectrum, maybe not the extreme ends, but from different sides of the political spectrum, actually sitting down and talking to each other and hashing out a compromise. They might not be particularly happy with the compromise, but that's how that's as you said, the good ideas will float to the top, the bad ideas will sink.
Yeah,
I think this is actually a subject where we maybe actually disagree, because I'm going to go ahead and say it. Like, I think the idea that we've ever been sort of, oh, Joe is gone.
Just need to wait.
I actually need a wee as well. Sorry, you want to pause that point of just for 2 seconds of that? Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah.
There you go. Dave's froze.
We'll wait for him to come back. So we're going on to Keir Starmer next, which is going to be another interesting one. I have some opinions on Keir Starmer, but I'll wait for that. I'm just going to... Actually, well, he's gone. I'm going to grab another 10.
I'm going to grab a refill while... As that seems to be what we're all doing.
Guess what, chat? I have the floor. Button, I'm surprised you haven't said Tina is a lie. I mean, I think that goes without saying. So, Dave,
Yeah.
well, it's just the two of us. So, what is your sort of? I think the term we use is tendency. I've heard that. What is your like socialist tendency? What was your sort of socialist journey?
So I kind of went through a very long spell where I didn't really know what. Again, it's like you were saying earlier about sort of knowing there was something wrong, but not quite what or what to do about it. And I kind of was quite apathetic for quite a long time.
Hey guys.
I was sort of generally of the opinion that Tories were bad, but couldn't really tell you why.
Welcome to being Scottish.
There's multiple reasons, trust me.
And then sort of gradually, kind of like I voted Lib Dem in when was it? 2010.
I was all making mistakes.
Yeah, being a student at the time, and Nick Clegg, he was really going for the student vote, and he got mine. Boy, did I regret that. And then sort of gradually went, sort of spent some time as a member of the Greens.
Greens are all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they are all right. And then it wasn't until old Jeremy sort of appeared on the horizon that I kind of was that was like, oh, actually, no, I kind of I like what this guy's saying, and card carrying Labour member.
Yeah, I've never really
seen his background as well.
I think I joined Labour. I'm technically a Labour affiliate member for my union, but I've never actually. I went from SNP to hard left very quickly. But yeah, so
I think when Corbyn was it, and again fully aware that it was at the in my own little echo chamber, and I don't think I ever really believed that he could win, but I kind of felt like I was sort of with my tribe at least, even if we lost.
It's definitely better than the alternative, I believe.
I don't know. I mean, I know you were saying you've got some opinions on Starmer. I've got some myself.
Yeah.
I'll put it this way. In the Labour leadership election, he was not my first choice, nor was he my second. And given that there were three candidates,
yeah.
Probably brings us nicely on
we'll get to that in a second. But so we're on the subject of political division. I'm just going to go ahead and say that I think the idea that any society has ever been politically united is a myth. And I think the sort of it's almost a callback to this day where we're the UK. We've always been elitist as fuck. Look back at the early 1900s and when even did commoners, people who didn't own land, get the vote in this country?
It's interesting because you get unity when there's war. That's when it happens. Basically, World War II was probably an example where actually the country was super united because there's a big, scary common enemy.
There's a genuine existential threat to the
There's
country.
a really good book called Sapiens. I don't know if you guys have heard of it or read it.
What was that again, sorry?
My sister recommended it to me, and I remember saying to her, I looked it up.
Sorry.
Joe, what was that again? Sorry, I missed that.
It's a book called Sapiens.
Okay.
It's basically the history of humanity in 600 pages. It's not a short book, but it's also not particularly taxing.
Some homework.
Anyone could read it, and most people should read it. It's really good.
Warning, apparently it's quite a good book, but it is pop history. The scientific community has panned it quite a bit.
It probably is pop history, but I still imagine there's a hell of a lot of truth in it, especially in some. I think you're right. It is probably pop history, but that's not to say there's no place in the world for pop history as well.
No, it transmits established ideas in academia to the public, which has its use.
Yeah. One of the points that it raises is that things like depression, anxiety, basically people feeling shit, weirdly tends to go like downhill in times of war and times of like mass struggle, because there's this kind of like all in it together like kind of feeling, and never is that more true than when bombs are literally kind of like raining down on your household. Not that I'm like saying we should be in a perpetual state of war. I don't
think you've ever advocate for that.
Say that because the UK has been in a perpetual state of war since the early 2000s. We are technically at war right now.
Lines.
But like, it's such in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah, I literally have family who fought in Afghanistan. My brother was a comms officer in Afghanistan, and yeah, I'm so like everyone else, I'm so detached from that because it's so imperialist. It's so like we are the guys. It's so like Cortez showing up in Mexico with 200 men with guns and cannons. It's just. It's not. It's difficult to even really call it a war.
Yeah, a lot of people don't get to see that side, which I know people should understand it more. Definitely, 100%. The education should be there, but obviously, people don't truly understand what it's like on the front lines, let alone the decisions made by the people. For what purpose? People don't understand those.
It's one of those weird things. Donald Trump is a good example. Oh God, I've just raised another subject. It's going to take us another 30 minutes. But it's a good example of this. We live in sort of an era of populist leaders who sort of appeal to people who support the troops, but don't actually give a shit about the troops. And it's sort of a thing of even if you're you're the kind of person who puts a poppy on your car and a sign that says support the troops, fuck the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. My brother came back from that and it fucked him up. It's fucked him up for life. There's been moments where we've had drinks and he's talked to me about the people that he's killed and how he'll never live that down. And it's just
I've had the exact same.
Honestly,
I've had the exact same thing with my uncle. He came back. He told me the things that he's seen has literally changed who he is. He doesn't want to talk about it, but it's so traumatizing. And a lot of things that's happened since then has changed his. As I said, who he is. It's something that a lot of people won't understand, and the people that are involved in making those decisions, they don't really care.
It's again, I think you're often probably not too dissimilar from kind of what some of you guys were saying about Brexit. I think with that you're kind of sold. You're sold a bit of a lie. You're sold you'll travel the world, you'll make good friends. You guys have seen the Royal Navy adverts, right?
God,
They're so I work in
I use a machine gun and all this shit.
I work in marketing, so I know an effective advert when I see one, and I'm those adverts are fucking good, but they completely sell you something that's a lie. They don't mention you killing people one time. They don't mention the wars you're going to be fighting in. They're just, you'll travel the world, you'll meet new friends, you'll unlock your hidden potential, all that sort of stuff. And it's incredible advertising, but it's
They don't tell you about the suicide rates and all that.
You're being sold a myth, and that I guess is what the military is exactly that. It's a myth. I don't particularly believe, probably odd for a conservative, but I don't particularly agree with the idea of a military. I don't particularly think, first of all, we need one. We have nuclear weapons. We could easily get rid of the army and just keep our nuclear deterrent. There's a lot of things that could stop people invading you. And actually, one of the main things that would stop people invading you is if you stop having an army. Switzerland have always basically been okay, and they've never had an army.
Yeah.
It's a really odd one. I think you actually make yourself more of a target and more of a we're so hated we're so hated by Middle Eastern countries because we've fucking been in Middle Eastern countries for the best part of 1,000 years, to be honest.
We've been messing around in there since the Crusades, pretty much.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we're so hated. We have had a military presence there for so long. They don't just hate us because we exist as Britain. They hate us because we've constantly been meddling in their affairs, often in kind of bloody wars. Like, if I feel like almost I would be comfortable with having a military if the whole premise of the military is you don't leave British soil. Like, you can protect and defend, but you will never leave British soil as a
And the amount of money as well. That's
the thing is, Britain hasn't had a land invasion since the French Revolution, literally. Like, we've never been a country that's been particularly at threat militarily.
Well,
except
the
from
World War
each
II,
other.
they tried, to be fair. There was like the Battle of Britain, and,
definitely.
there wasn't an attempt to invade Britain, albeit
The Battle of Britain, there was never, like, that's the thing about, like, the Germany in World War II. They never landed a land force in the UK. It was always air bombing.
But there's
It was
a risk
never
there,
an
wasn't there?
actual land invasion.
airborne assault would mean that you would have air supremacy, which means that you could then like launch the ground invasion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, but
The
they
only
never
reason they
actually...
didn't is because they lost the Battle of Britain.
Yeah.
And
like,
the weather was kind of on our side a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
British weather.
They better
But like
fly.
on the subject of, I feel like we're too sort of politically unified. So I'm going to say here, like, Joe, you were talking about like what your end goal is sort of people having like civil discussions where they're sort of listening to each other. My end goal is the proletariat rising up and overthrowing the people in power. And that's sort of like, that's another thing where it's like, in a way, we both support conflict in our society, but in a very different sort of sense. It's not. I think it's. I'll let this be the last word before we sort of go on to Keir Starmer. But I don't know that particularly that sorting things out in the free marketplace of ideas is necessarily going to be the way forward, because it's always going to be down to who gets a platform and who sort of controls the media. Ultimately, what I want is for like equality, is for everything in society to be equally owned by everyone. And I'm not particularly fussed about whether that comes down to like actual revolution or through like what I was talking about, like Proudhon's ideas of just sort of ignoring the government's existence and like establishing a shadow society. And I can't remember where I was going this because I've had about 2 shots of whiskey and 4 beers at this point.
You're doing well.
So maybe we should just move on to Keir Starmer.
If you want. But Dave, you want to say something?
Unless Dave has any.
I do. Oh, I had something then, but no, I do kind of feel like you're saying about having sort of civil debates between different sides. Like, is there kind of any limit to that? Do you think? Are there any people who or viewpoints that shouldn't be dealt with civilly?
I don't think for me, like, I don't think there's any. It's personal choice, right? Like, if you don't want to debate with a Nazi, that's your call. Like, and I would 1,000,000% like.
I really fancy a milkshake right now.
Too much.
Milkshake.
Like, yeah, I get that. If you don't want to debate with a Nazi, like, that's cool. I don't think I would want to sit down with a Nazi for. It might be quite interesting.
It would be
I'm not sure.
interesting.
Like, I don't think any ideas should ever be off the table. Like, so for me, for one thing, as soon as you delegitimize, and as soon as you like stop giving something like legal, what's the word? Like legal freedom of speech. As soon as you drive something underground, like you give it this like underground cultish status, and you make it seem like it's got credibility because the powers that be have decided that they don't want to talk about it. So for me, freedom of speech almost has no. I say almost has no limits. I imagine there are exceptions. There are probably exceptions when it gets to like hate speech, like as in
dehumanizing people
like
and
to
stuff.
Exterminate this group of people.
Well, that's literally Nazis, though. That's literally what Nazis.
Yeah, but we should still. I think there should be communication there.
Have a conversation. What I'm saying is, you could have a conversation with a Nazi where they aren't like saying, I would like to exterminate this group of people, but maybe an understanding of how they got to the place that they're in. Like,
totally, yeah, no.
The term you're looking for is crypto-fascism.
an opportunity to de-radicalize them, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, that's fine. I'm not saying completely ostracize them and never talk to them ever, but don't give their viewpoints any. Don't give their viewpoints legitimacy, because
don't give them a platform.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem with it. There's a thing called called Popper's paradox of tolerance. Don't know if have you heard of it? Where it's basically stating that if you're going to be truly tolerant, then you have to be tolerant of those who are intolerant. But the problem with that is that you, by tolerating the intolerant, you give them a platform, and you allow them to, you give them a chance. And it's exactly what happened in Germany in the 1930s. Was the Nazis won the election in 1933. That was a democratic election, and they won it.
And then to bring it home a bit, the UK in the early 1930s, where we had an actual fascist party that the Daily Mail. Do you remember when the Daily Mail ran an article?
I don't remember it, but yeah,
supporting the black shirts.
Yeah, I'm not that old. I don't remember it, but yeah.
Do you remember back in the day?
The problem for me is you get this level of intolerance now. Like this kind of intolerance would traditionally, I think, have come from. I think you'll all agree, would have come from the right wing. I think my problem now, and this is something that I really struggle with as someone who is young, and I'm not a Tory, but I am a conservative, I would say, is that as soon as you say I'm quite a conservative dude, so many people that would
attack you almost.
Well, you're basically Hitler then, and I'm like, no, I'm not. I just believe in lower taxes and smaller government.
It's the same as people saying they're communists, and
tolerance comes from now it comes from all aspects or all sides of the political spectrum, and cancel culture for me is a prime example of that. If you don't have this opinion that aligns, and Twitter is the worst place for it. If you can't tell, I really hate Twitter, but Twitter is the worst place for it, because if you don't have an opinion that fits within this very narrow paradigm of what's acceptable to believe and what's not acceptable to believe, then you're just out. You can't be part of the conversation, and that means that the conversation is happening between a few thousand people who all believe in exactly the same thing.
Yeah, but it needs to be the middle ground about the platform.
I'm going to make sort of 3 points. The first is, if no one's heard of ContraPoints, ContraPoints is a YouTube channel that makes a very good point that
I've seen that.
Cancel culture often is most damaging to minority and oppressed groups rather than big powerful people. I'm not a fan of, to the extent that cancel culture is a thing, I'm not a fan of it. The second is, I think people somewhat overstate the power that being underground gives you. As a socialist, I have to say, that's the third point. As a socialist, I have to say, I can't really say that there's a lot of power in having your ideology suppressed. I feel if that was true, I would very much like for the same thing to happen to the right, to the fascist right, as has happened to socialists, where literally people don't even know what they believe, because that is fucking effective. If people knew what socialists actually supported, they would probably support more of it. And to an extent, that's also true of fascists, unfortunately, because people are shit.
I wonder if it's not so much the power that it grants the actual movement, it's more the increasing radicalization that you might get by driving it underground. So if you become embedded within a super extremist organization, whether that's an extremist Islamic organization or far-right organization or whatever it is, the more it's delegitimized, the more prone you are to to succumbing to a radicalized version of that thing. And that's, I think, where it becomes not so much politically powerful, but personally powerful and can drive you to do some pretty bad things. Whereas I think if we have more of these conversations that are a bit more out in the open and without judgment, or like with some judgment, like you can judge, but you don't have to be a dick about it. Like if I think you have some of those conversations and try to come at them with a level of understanding rather than just going like, no, I'm right, you're wrong, and you're evil. Like I think you'd be able to like just change people's minds a bit more, because like having this conversation tonight with you guys, like I think there have been 3, 4, 5 points where I've actually come around and gone, yeah, fair point. Like I understand that, and it's made me like slightly question that aspect of that conversation. But like these conversations, I don't feel like happen that much. Like,
No.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, on Twitch, as I was saying, obviously this is the first I've seen of UK political debate on Twitch, which is a huge platform. So
there you go, first of a kind.
In the interest of keeping this ordered at all, I'll what's say to like letting Dave have the last word and then moving on to the next subject, which is
hey, it's
Keir
my
Starmer.
channel. No, I'm joking. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, sure. Like to kind of finish off my the point I was making about the paradox of tolerance is that you have to, this is why it's paradoxical, but in order for a society to be tolerant, it can't be tolerant of intolerance, because the intolerant they don't debate, they don't debate in good faith. They will say meet me in the middle, and you step towards them and they step back and say meet me in the middle, and it just creeps and creeps and creeps and creeps, and I think that's partly why we are where we are. It's really hard to get people to look at anything outside of what is, given that most people get most of their they get most of their entire worldview from a very few sources, and particularly if we're talking print media and now online media, but
YouTube quite a lot.
Six people own most of the UK's newspapers.
Yeah.
They're all rich people. They're all going to be wanting to stay rich people, because rich people tend to do that, and they're going to do what they can to make people believe and vote in ways that keep them in power. And there's that as a part of it, and also with social media, there's this it doesn't matter if you're an expert or something in not, you've all got to say, you're all shouting as loud as each other, and so someone who is an absolute expert in their field can come out with this completely well researched, well-rounded, well thought out idea and say, look, this is what I think about a certain subject, and but no, Gary on Facebook says it's bollocks, and I don't know who to believe, because they're both saying it as loud as each other. It's this notion that one person's ignorance is worth as much as another person's knowledge, and I think that is the kind of the corruption of free speech.
Yeah.
We've lost Joe.
I'm literally disconnected for about 30 seconds there, so I'm really sorry.
It's right. It looks like you're.
Point, but I'm sure it was great.
It looks like you're really intent in like you're thinking of quite a lot there. Okay, so we're going to move on to the Labour Party as a whole, if you want.
Farm for Storm.
Yeah. So okay, we'll move on to Keir Starmer.
Right. Fuck Keir Starmer.
All right, wait, hold up. Let's get some. Okay.
Hold your horses.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to see a few points of view in regards to the movement inside of Labour. Obviously, that politically assassinated almost Corbyn's campaign, and his view on that, Keir Starmer's response to that almost. As well as, obviously, I've watched quite a lot of him in the House of Commons addressing Boris. It's, he's seems to be doing a good enough, well, I wouldn't say, I don't know if it's good enough job, but it's shown to be a good job by both sides almost. I want people's viewpoints on that.
I mean,
Got to start with Dave on this one, right?
Oh, what's that? Sorry.
Carried Labour member.
Yeah, me too, mate. Yeah.
You're the insider expert here.
Joe, your screen's frozen still. Do you want to show again and then bring it back up?
Yeah, hang on.
Oh, there he goes.
Yeah.
Shall I wait for him to come back, or?
I'm gonna.
Sure.
If
Yeah.
we can
just make sure that
take a small break here. I need to quickly just slash.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. We can take a quick break.
All right.
There you go. He's back.
Nice. 2 minutes.
Am I back?
Yep. You're back.
You're back.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. Yeah. He's, Bunton's just gone for a quick whiz.
Cool.
So yeah, if anyone wants to become a regular talker on this, I haven't done much promotion on this channel at all. It's quite natural. A lot of people have come and just searched political, and it's been pretty good actually. Got good response this week and last week. It's going to be a weekly Friday, 8 o'clock, 8 to 8, 8 till late. Sorry.
8
So-
to 8.
8 to 8. We're going to 8 o'clock in the morning, boys. What are you talking about?
Yeah, man, I'm up for doing whenever you want me on, dude. It's been really fun.
Yeah.
Been really good.
Cool. I've had a few people like on Facebook in the group say that they can't make it on Friday evening, so I might have a smaller catch up session during the week at some point.
I was gonna say you could do like a little sort of one hour on like a Tuesday and a Thursday or whatever, like a little kind of Yeah,
I want to try to get a schedule of sorts going, and if you want to talk on that, you're more than welcome to. More the merrier. Obviously, it might have to get a bit more structured with more people, but we're going down that route anyway. I think. I mean, it's working well, I believe. So, and everyone seems to be enjoying themselves. How's everyone's
Good,
first time?
Yeah.
I get to drink beers by myself without feeling guilty about it.
Yeah, there you go. That's an excuse for you. Sorted.
Bonus.
Cool. And if there's any other hot topics that I don't, I do, yeah. It's all right. We're not going to wait. So yeah, if there's any topics that you ever want to bring up, just give me a message on Facebook. I'm sure we can fit it in. I know obviously we talk about a topic on average about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. That's fine. Obviously the deviations and that are more than welcome. If it gets a bit too out of hand, then I might have to rein it back. But it's fair game. It's nice and relaxed. You just chill out, chat. Cool.
I was so impressed that we went from like banking to I think the American Civil War. That was just so good.
Yeah.
Well, given that, I mean, you've seen Hamilton. They basically invented modern banking, didn't they?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, man, I went into Hamilton as such a skeptic. Like, I hate musicals. I really don't get on with them. And then, like,
have you seen
my
Book of Mormon?
girlfriend's stepsister was like, "Right, we're watching Hamilton. It's the greatest thing you're ever going to watch. It's a musical." And I was like, here we go. And then by the end, I was like, Hamilton is the greatest thing ever. Like, I totally get it. It's so good. Sorry, Keir Starmer.
Oh, Keir Starmer. Well,
go on, Dave. What's your first impressions?
I voted for Jeremy Corbyn as leader twice.
As did I.
And yeah. I don't know. Starmer is.
He's an ex-prosecutor, isn't
he? He's lost my enthusiasm. I'll say that much. Like when Jeremy Corbyn took over as Labour leader, I said before, it kind of felt like that sort of someone who was at least roughly on the same page as me politically, or at least in the same book as me politically, was.
Would it be a stretch to say ideologically as well?
On the same page, or in the same, or at least reading the same book as me, was finally in a position of power in UK politics, and there might be some broadening of this whole kind of homogenous neoliberal mess that Labour had become, since Tony Blair took over. And I felt I used to be quite politically apathetic, and then it wasn't until sort of around about sort of 2015, and then Jeremy Corbyn taking over, that it kind of really ignited this enthusiasm I had, for politics, and sort of like that I realised just how important it was, because people think, oh, politics is boring, switch off.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is. If sitting and watching them yammer away in the House of Parliament is boring most of the time.
Not always. Yeah.
It's like
most of the
theatre sometimes.
It's a guilty pleasure, isn't it?
But then, and I felt this, incredible enthusiasm, and this hope, and things might actually change for the better. And just to have 5 years of, not just the Tories, because you expect it from them, but to have half of his own part, half of the Labour Party, never even given him a chat from the moment he was elected as leader. Oh, he's unelectable, blah, 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 and then just dig constantly at him. And I knew, I always hoped that he might, but I think I always knew that he was never gonna be, gonna sit in number 10. It was never gonna happen realistically.
But there was that hope.
But there was that hope there, and then. And then the election in 2017 happened, and they came within, they took the Tories' majority. They came within, if a few thousand votes in a few marginal seats had gone the other way, it could well have been it could have been a Labour government, and it was so close, and there was that
Wasn't
feeling
for the DUP,
it just might, and then. For them to keep on at him and keep on at him and keep on at him after that, and trying to paint it as some kind of horrendous failure, when, okay, granted it wasn't a win, but it certainly wasn't the failure they painted it as. And then, and now those exact same people are back in charge of the party, and they're back in control of it. And I know a lot of people who have left, who've quit the party.
I was almost one of them.
I have been sorely tempted.
Yeah,
so sorely
me too.
Tempted to do it. The only thing that has kept me in the party is I've stayed in the party for the same reason that I voted to stay in the EU.
To get Tories out.
Outside, you can't affect change.
Yeah, you need to get in power.
What would you say to, like, I guess, like, despite what you think or I think about, like, someone's unelectable, everyone's electable, right? Like, Corbyn was electable if people decide to elect him. Like, everyone is to some extent electable. Like, what would you say to the fact that, like, it seems, based on what electability is like to the public, like, what would you say to the fact that Keir Starmer seems to be a more electable politician and seems more likely to be able to bring Labour back to power, especially as he's going up against Boris Johnson? I think the veneer has come off with Boris Johnson now, and it seems more likely that Starmer versus Boris Johnson seems like a much more even, if not winnable fight for Starmer. And surely him getting back into power is, like, it's not perfect for you, but it's a hell of a lot better than not being in power.
This is why I'm so conflicted over the whole thing, is that, yes, I want to see a Labour government, and yes, Keir Starmer as Prime Minister is infinitely better than Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, and yes, it's gratifying to watch Boris Johnson get handed his arse every week at Prime Minister's questions, but then again, Jeremy Corbyn used to hold his own against Boris Johnson. People forget.
I agree.
This.
He was never as bad at Prime Minister's questions.
No, and the thing,
I agree with you.
I do wonder how Jeremy Corbyn, if he was still Labour leader, if he was still holding Boris Johnson to account now in a socially distanced House of Commons, when Boris Johnson doesn't have 300 braying arseholes behind him, drowning out everything he says. And I wonder how much of this, how much of Keir Starmer's, admittedly, I mean, granted, it doesn't take much to make Boris Johnson look stupid. Saying that Keir Starmer does better than Boris Johnson in Prime Minister's questions, frankly, that's a given. It's not much of a horse race. It's and.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent. I do think that he is more electable with the general public, and that may well be the truth. It doesn't mean that it doesn't make me very sad, because Jeremy Corbyn is, in my opinion, the most decent and principled human being to ever come that close to being Prime Minister. And if being a decent and principled human being doesn't make you electable, then what is the fucking point?
Yeah.
I think so. It's really interesting because we're framing the entire Keir Starmer question within what was Corbyn.
Yeah, I mean, we can speak a bit on that.
It's kind of a weird one. I feel like with you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth at all, but with Corbyn, you had your tribe. These were the people, him, and what the party became under him were the people who believed exactly what you believed. And now you're probably finding that you have to compromise on some of those positions, or you decide you find a new home, which is only realistically for you going to be the Green Party, or if you want to go super extreme, not super extreme, but you Socialist Workers' Party or whatever it is. But I think now you probably had to find that you've got to.
I don't live in Scotland, otherwise I'd be there with you, mate.
You probably found now that you've
not
got
to be confused with the Socialist Party of Scotland, which is a different party.
Splitters.
People's front of Judea, whatever it is.
But no, I think it's a valid point because we are kind of framing this whole discussion about Keir Starmer in terms of Jeremy Corbyn, but then we kind of have to because Keir Starmer was so instrumental in everything that went on behind the scenes, discrediting Jeremy Corbyn and making they said he was unelectable, and by saying it, they made it so. It was a complete self-fulfilling prophecy. If they had just fallen into line, I mean, well, not fallen into line, because that makes it sound dictatorial, but at least given him a chance and backed it, and not during an election campaign, just backed him and said, okay, he's our leader now. We want to be in, and it's fair enough, you saying, surely I'd rather see Labour in power with Keir Starmer than Labour out of power with Jeremy Corbyn. And of course I want to see of course I want to see a Labour government. Keir Starmer is the Labour leader. Ergo, that means I want to see Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. But it would have been nice to hear some on the other side within the Labour Party say the same thing about Jeremy Corbyn. For all this talk of don't back the man, back the party. It's fair enough, I'll back the party. I will back the party under Starmer.
How much of? But sorry, I interrupted you.
But there were so many people who didn't when Corbyn was in charge, and that's what angers me.
I'll ask a quick question. Then I definitely want to give Bunton some time to speak. To be fair, because you have not said that much. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, so two things actually. I feel like a lot of what the problem with Corbyn was not him. I felt that the real lack of strength with that, not administration, but you know what I mean, was the people that he managed to get allied to him. Is that he had a couple of okay people, but I feel like his front bench or shadow cabinet, were not that good. They were not the most talented people within the Labour Party. They might have believed the right things, but they weren't the most talented speakers. They weren't the most talented people to be in the positions that they were in. And that is something that I always found Jeremy Corbyn struggled with. Now, I guess one of Keir Starmer's strengths is that he's been able to create coalitions with, I guess, the mainstream of the Labour Party, I guess. Like, he's been like, so one of the refreshing things for me was watching, Ed Miliband being back on the front bench. That Ed Miliband, like,
that was good. That was good.
Was savage. Like, it was absolutely incredible to watch. Like, it was.
I've got a lot of time for Ed Miliband. I mean, admittedly, at the time when I was sort of particularly apathetic politically, this was because this was during Ed Miliband's tenure as Labour leader.
Yeah.
But this was when he had the likes of Ed Balls still on there, and they were basically peddling austerity light.
Yeah,
and I think he's got some good socialist credentials. I do, but then there were people that he surrounded himself with that really didn't. And it's interesting you say that there were people people on Jeremy Corbyn's front bench that maybe weren't the best, and maybe you're right, but I think that that's possibly because he did try to build bridges with the right right wing of the party. Hilary Benn, for instance. He had him on his front bench. He early on really tried to have as broad a church as possible represented across the front bench on the opposition benches, but one by one, they gave him no choice. If you're going to be, a minister or a shadow minister, you can't be sniping at the leader of your party, because then that undermines the whole party. And again, the self-fulfilling prophecy of being unelectable comes into play. When you've got his own ministers, because they disagree with him ideologically. And as Bunton said, these people on the right of the Labour Party, they're not socialists.
I get that.
They're capitalists, and they don't want to change that.
I get that, but tried to form coalitions is not the same as actually doing it. And for whatever reason, Jeremy Corbyn didn't manage to. And I'll just go back to my original point. Like, I don't think that everyone in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet was terrible. I actually was always fairly impressed with Emily Thornberry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always thought she was good. She always did she deputised at PMQs a couple of times, and I thought she was pretty good. And there were other people who I thought at times were pretty decent as well. But I think Keir Starmer, I have two things about Keir Starmer for me. Fundamentally, what it comes down to is I think eventually he's going to be Prime Minister, because it seems like a fucking Prime Minister. Like, he walks, talks, he does all the right things to become a Prime Minister. And at the moment, he would probably fucking walk it in an election because he does all the right things. My main concern with Starmer is I have no idea what that guy believes in. Like, I have no clue. Like, not to I seem like I'm fucking banging on about Hamilton all night, but the character, the historical figure, is it Aaron Burr? And he's always Burr. And they're always saying I don't know what you believe, so I'm going to vote for the other guy because at least I know what that guy believes in. I think it was Jefferson. But it's kind of the same with. It's one of my reservations about Starmer is he has kind of said all the right things. He's criticized Boris Johnson enough, and he's riding pretty high in the opinion polls. But no one really, unless you're probably quite close to Keir Starmer, you don't really know what he believes in. He hasn't actually set out this is what the Labour Party is going to be under me. This is who we're going to represent. This is what we're going to do. And I know it's early days, but he's kept his cards really, really close to his chest. And I'll be interested to see, because at some point he won't be able to do that, right? He's going to have to make a call. He's going to have to set out exactly what a Labour government under him would look like. And that's what I think would be really interesting, because at the moment I have no clue.
I mean, I think you're right. I think that was the thing with, again, the other thing that lost the election was, was the centrists within the Labour Party forcing a second referendum onto the agenda, which people didn't want. And I'll be honest, as a Remainer, I don't want a second referendum now because I don't see how it would solve anything. And but again, not going off down that tangent.
I think.
But yeah. So I think I don't know. My opinion on Starmer is that he has backtracked on quite a lot of his pledges because he's took. I mean, you say it's one thing to try to make coalitions and another to do it, which again I can accept. But it's very hard to make coalitions with people who don't want to make coalitions with you, or who claim they do and then stab you in the back as soon as before the ink's dry, which is kind of what happened with Corbyn. And when Starmer first became Labour leader, he made all these pledges about not backtracking on the work that had been done under court. And you say you can say all these things like oh he's a weak leader. Maybe he was. Maybe he is. You could all of these allegations against Jeremy Corbyn, but one thing that was always popular, the policies were always popular, especially funnily enough, when they gave these policies to people but didn't tell them whose policies they were. I lost track of the number of studies that I read about where they'd gone out into the public and said, the Pepsi challenge with policies, and said, what do you think of these policies? Oh yeah, that's good. That's a good policy. That's Jeremy Corbyn's policy. Oh, I don't like it then.
Well, a lot of people don't read the manifestos, do they? Like a lot of people don't know the information.
And so if they had built on the manifesto that they had that they had last year,
yeah.
And he doesn't seem to show much intention of doing that, and which is why, as much as I am going to stay a member of the Labour Party, I'm going to keep voting Labour.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's very much a case at the moment, and I would love nothing more than him to prove me wrong, but it's very much in spite of rather than because of him.
I guess you feel like you're probably voting Tory light now if you voted for Starmer
to some degree,
which I would understand, but I still think Starmer, like, what can that guy do? Like, he's seen the Corbyn formula try and fail. Like, I get where he's coming from. If he drops Corbyn era policies, he's probably dropping them because he thought they weren't a vote winner. And I think if you'd seen an exact continuation of Corbyn era policies under Starmer, I really think the British public would have picked up on it really quickly and would have rejected it in the same way.
He could have presented them a bit better, at least made it more understood, or at least capitalised on the people that did, obviously want those changes, and a lot of votes were for Jeremy Corbyn, and because of those policies.
I mean, I'm Scottish. For me, voting Labour has always been voting Tory light. Because, I don't know if you guys know what the state of Scottish Labour is, but it's not fucking good.
Fucked. Don't the Tories have more seats than Labour now, or something?
Yeah.
In Scotland?
No, they have 6 seats.
Oh, sorry, Scotland.
Yeah, they have more seats than Labour, but
that's crazy.
The SNP have all the seats.
Yeah,
it's all SNP. You look at a map of Scotland, it's all yellow.
In the words of Coldplay.
Yeah. But it's. I don't so much feel like I'm voting Tory, at least not so much as I did in, say, 2015. Because, and again, a lot of that is down to the bits of Corbyn's policies that he hasn't binned off yet, and hopefully won't. But again, the policies weren't the problem. You say that the Corbyn formula failed. The Corbyn formula was never given a chance to succeed. The Corbyn formula was sabotaged from the moment from the moment they started. And
I guess my question would be why? Like, this is
why? Why? Well,
you've asked two socialists.
the media is owned by. Well, look at who owns all the newspapers. You know, these are the arch capitalists. If
I can jump in there for a sec. In this country, I've talked to there's a guy in the socialist server that me and Kurt hang out in, who is from Sweden, and his description of like the UK media landscape was like, Jesus, all your newspapers are tabloids, and like when you look at it, they fucking are, because like here's what you've got: two categories. You've got the right wing tabloids and the left wing broadsheets. But like in reality, you have left liberal.
That's not true, because the Times isn't a tabloid. The Telegraph is a tabloid.
You've got exceptions, but broadly that's what it is. But that's not the point. The broadsheet tabloid distinction isn't the point. The point is you have left liberal publications like the Guardian and the Independent, and you have right wing publications like the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Times, etc. But like they're all fucking liberal. Like they're all on the same page. They're all privately owned publications, except for the BBC, which is
economically liberal. Would that be?
Yeah,
economically liberal, not social.
Like the difference is progressive and conservative liberal. That's the distinction. Yeah. The BBC is sort of its own thing, but like at this point, the BBC is the board of the BBC is all Tories at this point. Like, of course, like they were never going to support Corbyn because like they all have an ideology and they all have the same ideology, and the ideology is liberalism. Like,
if Jeremy Corbyn had become Prime Minister, he would have hit them all in the pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
Is the short answer. That's why they were all so utterly opposed to him, because he terrified them.
Yeah,
like probably the biggest actual left wing newspaper in the UK is like the Morning Star, a thing which no one has heard of.
The Mirror is left wing, right?
Sort of, like, but the Mirror is in the same like left liberal space.
No,
like they're just like they're the counterpoint of the Times, where like they're the left wing tabloid as opposed to the right wing.
It's kind of a centre left tabloid. It's not really. It's more centrist than tabloid. Even it's kind of slightly socially progressive, but it's still economically liberal.
It's always supported Labour, I think, as far as I know. I guess my key point on this would be, so in the run up to the Brexit referendum, almost all of the newspapers, actually, I think other than the Express, were pro-Remain. I don't know about the Mail, maybe the Mail as well. But I think most of the others were Remain, actually, even when you look at the Telegraph, the Times, obviously the Guardian and the Independent, but actually the broad consensus and almost what you'd read on the BBC and almost all other forms of media were pro-Remain. But Brexit still won, so it's impossible. It's possible, to win without the media consensus on your side.
Totally. But then this is the Brexit also had the even in the papers that were outwardly pro-Remain, there were still quite a few pro-Leave columns and pro-Leave columnists.
But the headline.
There were very few pro-Corbyn columnists. You had maybe Owen Jones, one or two others in the mainstream newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, and don't forget as well that the Brexit campaign was less than a year, like less than a year or so. Jeremy Corbyn had 5 years of this. And let's face it, and the only thing that lost it for him, really, again, was Brexit. Because he was damned if he did and damned if he didn't regarding his Brexit.
Yeah, they made sure of that.
Brexit policy. If he'd stuck to his guns, he's a well-known Eurosceptic. If he'd stuck to his guns from that, he would have been completely panned by the Remain side. If he'd come and then by coming out for Remain, he gets called a hypocrite. There's no way he wins in this scenario.
If I can take the floor for a sec. Oh Christ, where do I start? Who's excited for New Labour 2? Fuck me. Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, he was always the compromise candidate, right? That was always his thing, is he was the centre of the Labour Party. He was always the guy who was between the quote-unquote Corbynistas and the Blairites, right? And then you were asking, like, what is... Oh, I don't know what, like, Keir Starmer stands for. He stands for the status quo, right? Keir Starmer stands for everything now. He stands for the centre. Like, it's not that difficult to figure out what he stands for. Like, the point of no return for me was, like, the purge of, like, RLB and the wing of the
that was a warning flag.
Labour Party.
Yeah, that was
But compromise wins elections.
Yes, and this is the thing. Like, I remember during in 2019, this was literally what actual Blair was saying, was like, oh, we just need to put aside all our principles because the thing that matters is that the Labour Party wins the election. That is what Starmer stands for.
I'm hoping he's doing that so that obviously he can gain power and then reimburse those.
Like, yeah, absolutely. He stands for electoral politics. He stands for the institution of the Labour Party winning an election. And he probably will, because what he is the same thing as Biden over in the States. You know, he's slightly like less senile and more sort of sensible. But he's broadly speaking the same thing. He represents a return to the status quo. He is the same as Cameron. He is a guy who wears the suit. He wears the suit, and he is represents this idea of a competent statesman and a competent politician and a return to normalcy. Yeah. That is his selling point.
This is like what I was saying, right? He looks like a politician. He talks like a professional politician. He's the sort of guy who you expect to see on TV being a politician. Like he just has that. Jeremy Corbyn, unfortunately, I don't think he ever had that. And I mean, that's a shame that's what it takes to become prime minister.
Yeah.
So Jeremy Corbyn was just a nice old man who made jam, and he deserved better.
Yeah.
And actually, Jeremy,
exactly that. He deserved better. He didn't deserve to be prime minister, because no one deserves to be prime minister. But he deserved better than he got. He didn't deserve to have his name dragged through the mud for 5 years.
And Jeremy Corbyn's done some really good things in his career, even though I probably
continuing to do so.
Jeremy Corbyn on 95% of things, especially economically. But Jeremy Corbyn has always actually been very, very socially liberal, which is where I position myself. I remember when Jeremy Corbyn teamed up with David Davis from the Conservative Party to argue against ID cards and extensive mass surveillance and all this stuff. And he's always been a champion of I think individual privacy and stuff like that. He's done some really good stuff. But without again framing the conversation around Jeremy Corbyn, I think Labour found themselves in a position where basically they're having to decide between, or that they have had to decide between, the principles that I think actually the vast majority of Labour supporters really believe in and want the Labour Party to be about, and what they think can win. And it's completely up for debate, why those principles that probably Keir Starmer stands for are electable. I don't know why that's the case. And it's a really interesting, really interesting debate to have. Yeah, you probably have some really strong ideas on it, but still, that is the situation that we find ourselves in, is that it was Jeremy Corbyn not in power, or Keir Starmer, who I see it right now. He will probably be our future prime minister at some point. I almost have no doubt about that.
I also have no doubt about that. That's the thing, is what he represents is the idea of the Labour Party being like the Democrats and the Republicans, where it's just sort of an interchangeable political machine. Jeremy Corbyn represented actual ideals. I remember reading the Labour manifesto and seeing the thing about the goal for 20% employee ownership. Maybe it was even I don't even remember what percent it was. Maybe it was just 5%, but it made me so horny.
It was in there. That was. It doesn't matter what the percentage was. It was in there, and it's never been in there.
For employee ownership, but like socialism is never going to be acceptable to the mainstream political apparatus.
He's offering real change.
Yeah, Keir Starmer represents Labour as another like. You change the color from blue to red, but in the words of one of my friends from a server I'm in, it's still the same 10. Imagine if we had to like refit 10 Downing Street for actual human beings, we'd have to take out all the heat lamps.
It's interesting because I think what you had in the kind of Corbyn era is you had it actually goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Like
you had actual hope
ideas. Like you really had like sort of 3 years ago, you had a proper Labour left who represented old school socialist ideas with a kind of like new technological. I never felt like they built enough on the technological kind of side of things, but you had a proper Labour left, and you knew that was a socialist Labour force. And then you had a conservative right that was, fundamentally, basically free markets, basically individual liberty, and you had a choice to make. Whereas I think, for the kind of the 10 years,
you had the Lib Dems. Don't forget about the Lib Dems.
Let's definitely forget about the Lib Dems.
What was the leader of the Lib Dems? The one who lost her own seat.
Swanson. Yeah.
Fuck you, Joe Swanson.
yeah.
Sorry, you were saying.
I can't remember what I was saying now, but it was, you had like a proper like division of ideas. You had like, if you were voting Labour, you were voting for a fundamentally socialist like Labour Party. If you were voting Conservative, you were voting for an actual fairly right wing Conservative Party. Like, and under Keir Starmer, I feel like he's not as centrist as or like centre right as Blair. I feel like he probably fits more within the centre ground. But again, we don't actually know this because Keir Starmer has never said what he believes in.
Yeah.
And he's probably not going to say for a while what he believes in.
I think he might be scared.
That's the thing. That's what the centre is the centre doesn't need to say what their beliefs are because their beliefs are just the status quo.
Yeah, it's almost an absence of ideology. It's like the centre ground is not an ideology. It's an absence of ideology. And
it's definitely an ideology, but it's an ideology that doesn't need to say what it is because what it is just the default.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty much a continuation. It's pleasing.
The Nokia ringtone of politics.
It's a compromise.
The Nokia ringtone of politics. That is such a good line.
The ringtone. The Nokia 3310 of politics.
So, Mr. Starmer, what do you think?
You got my vote.
But again, it's weird because I still think that guy's gonna win. I think next election,
I'm sorry.
How much whiskey have you had?
It destroys me. Sorry, you were saying.
No.
I can't remember. That was fucking brilliant.
Sorry.
I think I just went back to my original point. Like that guy will probably win. I think as long as he plays his cards fairly close to his chest, forms the right alliances within the Labour Party, and basically doesn't offend the British public too much. For whatever reason, they seem to. I guess the media played a huge part in it, but they seem to be offended by Corbyn. As long as he doesn't do that, he'll probably end up being Prime Minister, and will be something akin to a Blair. I feel like Blair was probably closer to the Conservatives, like to the right wing, than Starmer will be. I think like Corbyn's had enough of a lasting impact on the Labour Party to.
Definitely. Yeah.
I think people. I remember watching this video and someone described this of Obama as it's politics without ethics. It's politics for politics' sake, where it's just a power game. It's not about any ideology. It's not about any moral principle. It's just a bunch of people in suits trying to be the most powerful bastard.
Yeah. And that, we're left with someone like Boris Johnson in charge, who he didn't get into politics because he
didn't want to be Prime Minister.
I mean, he was raised for politics. To be clear, he went to Eton. He was like, from the moment of his birth, he was going to be a politician.
But he didn't go for the top job because he thought he'd be good at it or because he thought he could make the world better by doing it. He did it because he thought he deserved it, and because he spent his entire life
After the campaign,
wanting to be king of the world, and he did it for his own ego.
I don't think it was even about wanting to be powerful. I think it's just that he was always told that he was like someone who should have power. And I think it's just the realization of that.
I think
him and Gove, wasn't
it? In common, in that like they or Boris Johnson before he kind of came to power never really spoke about. You could never really pin Boris Johnson to a specific belief set. Like that guy has moved in between faux libertarian, nationalist, conservative, and when he was mayor of London, liberal, metropolitan, sort of.
Yeah, it's politics without ethics. It's just politics for politics' sake.
Yeah,
he doesn't believe in anything except Boris Johnson.
And again, like his lack
or
of
David. What's his name again? Like David Pfeffel.
No, Boris is the Pfeffel.
Yeah,
his real name is Alexander.
Alexander, that's it.
Yeah,
Alexander the Pfeffel Johnson.
His name just sums him up.
That's the thing, is that like Boris Johnson is and always has been a character that he has played. And that's the reality of it, is that just like what we're sold is just like, because Joe, you work in marketing, you must know this. It's all just personas. It's all just like PR bullshit.
Yeah.
We have never had, I don't know if we've ever had a leader of state or any like MP who is actually just a person, like who is actually just a human being. It's all just marketing.
I mean, I'm sure there have been some like that. I still think like I get apathetic about politics sometimes, but I still think a lot of MPs do really good jobs for their local communities. Like I still think there are a lot of really hardworking MPs who might vote on like not what you believe in on national issues, but I still think most MPs really try hard to do the best jobs for their local communities, and some of them do really good things and some of them do some shitty things.
Yeah, some of them do some real bad stuff.
MPs maybe, but like PMs, I don't know.
PM is more tricky. I feel like the higher up the ladder you climb, the more you have to compromise, the more you have to be a character, the more you have to work within the confines of what your party is telling you can and can't be, what you can and can't believe.
Sometimes not even within the party.
There's a brilliant Burniston sketch that's just about like the one issue MP candidate who's like, oh, we need to fix this traffic light, and he eventually like climbs up and up the ladder, and eventually becomes MP. And he loses an election because like he eventually like introduced this got rid of this traffic light, and there was a crash, and he's just like, I don't even fucking drive. I don't even fucking drive.
Doesn't care about the issue.
Yeah.
Right. I am gonna have to.
Yeah, no.
At night, I think I've got to be up for work in sort of 7.5 hours.
Oh Jesus, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, it's been like 3 hours or so.
Stopping point.
Yeah, 3 hours or so. It's been going on now. Thank you everyone for joining in. You're more than welcome to come and chat with us again. Probably get some other people in as well. Don't really know what the limit is on people coming into these chats, but very much appreciate everyone's perspective.
All yelling at each other at once.
Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed it. We covered a few options.
Been a really good chat.
Yeah, good talk, guys.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I'll be putting this on YouTube, and yeah, cool. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Take it easy. See you guys there.
See ya.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.